Hi, everybody. It's the Stratosphere Lounge with your one and only host, Bill Whittle. And as you may or may not know, we are now on episode 101. It's TSL 101, which means we had our gigantic, epic 100th episode 2 weeks ago. It took a week to recover. Everybody was all dressed up. We had a large studio audience. But now, as you can see, well, maybe you can't see, I'll zoom out for you here because we can do these advanced things now that we got this serious action going here. Check it out. I'm just kind of relaxing here in the studio. I've got my Hillsdale College t-shirt on. I've got my comfy BillWhittle.com fleece. I'm just taking it easy. I'm kind of rocking it old school now, relaxing a little bit after the last show because the last Stratosphere Lounge was a super one, and the Stratosphere Lounge remembers. So I'll just have a nice little cup of coffee and put on my man-boy onesies and have a giant cup of coffee that I can hold in both hands and look over expectantly at the Christmas tree. And instead of talking about getting a Johnny Astro or a Major Matt Mason or something like that, I can talk about how exciting it's going to be now that we've got the Obamacare health markets available, which have kept me out of having insurance for several months. Now, you can't buy insurance today. You can buy stopgap insurance, but all the big policies won't let you buy anything until January. So I got booted off of my old plan. My new plan is going to cost 3 times as much, and I have to buy like stopgap insurance now because the government says that there's a product that I have to buy. I don't have a choice not to buy it. I have to buy it, but I can't buy it until January. And when people say, why do you hate government so much? Why do you have such a problem with government? It's because they're making me buy a product that costs 3 times more than it used to, but even though I have to buy it, I can't buy it till January. Then I have to buy it. It's crazy, nuts. It's crazy nuts. But anyway, I'm back. Hope everybody's doing well. It's been, it's been a weird couple months just on and off, not anything really specific. But, usually I just kind of bull through the summer and try and just work through the summer. And this summer I decided to try to do something a little different. Bought the plane, obviously, which was a big deal. Went up for a week in Oshkosh, which was the second best time I've had, maybe in my life. First best time I had was back 2 weeks ago or 3, whatever it was, in Tampa with Viper Check here, or is also known as our friend Foghorn. The best time of my life down at the naming ceremony, and did that afterburner, which some of you may have seen by now, called Happy Warriors, about the few minutes I spent in this CENTCOM Joint Operations Command, and they said they played it for them, and they seemed to like it. Made me very happy. So I actually took a little time off, and it's like the problem here in LA right now is that even flying, it's too hot. It's just too hot to fly. I won't say it's too hot to fly safely, but it's too hot to fly in a airplane with a bubble canopy on it. All the flying I've done has been literally get there at 7 o'clock, 6:45, 7 o'clock, push her out, do half an hour before the sun goes down. But it's starting to feel a little bit cooler, and I've always lived in warm climates. I was born in New York City, but I moved to Bermuda just before my 4th birthday. So, Bermuda, Florida, Southern Cal, it gets a little warm. And I've always had this kind of thing about summer. I guess you get the kind of summer that happens when you're living hot places. I don't like the summer. It's my least favorite time of year. Anytime really between, figure just June and August, just forget it. It's not, you just can't do anything. It's just brutal. It's 100, 107, 108 degrees. And it's nasty. It's a lot nicer on the other side of the hill. It's 30 degrees cooler over there sometimes, but that's not where we are. Anyway, enough of this nonsense. There's a lot of great things to talk about. So having done special shows, missed a bunch of Stratosphere Lounges with all the traveling, and then the 100th episode and all that stuff, we thought we'd just do kind of a plain meat and potatoes thing, because there's been a lot of things that people have had questions about and haven't had a chance to ask. And by the way, somebody just pointed out the spiky hair. I was thinking that too. And I was thinking, man, that's kind of a Philip J. Fry kind of a hairstyle there. And I just want to mention something, just because we always kind of do something a little random right at the beginning of the show. I had been a huge fan of Futurama. I hadn't seen any of a couple of the afterburners, of the new Futuramas. But I hadn't seen a whole lot of the new ones. It just went off the air finally after 10 seasons, I think, 10 or 11, just about a year ago. But they were on Fox for 3 or 4 or 5 years, something like that. And then Comedy Central picked them up after like a 6-year hiatus, something really long time. So anyway, I ordered the last season on iTunes because I only watch Hulu and iTunes. And I watched the final season of Futurama. And not only is it a hysterical show and a very, very clever show, visually very clever. I just wanted to say this because we've talked about these kind of things before, just culturally. Futurama is the only animated show and one of the very few TV shows out there that's got so much heart that it'll make you laugh. A lot of these animation shows will make you laugh, but Futurama is the only animation show that'll make you cry. And it really will do it. There were a couple episodes of Futurama that were just achingly sad. And I wanted to talk about this just for a minute because you can do anything to make, a laugh is pretty easy to get. You can have a funny joke and make people laugh. You don't need to know the person making the joke. You don't have to have any particular connection to him. And a lot of the humor on shows like Family Guy and South Park, which is basically just, shock humor, and Family Guy is so dark. It's so dark. It's so awful. It's such an awful, mean show. It's such a mean view of life. It's just really, really, really awful. It's just corrosive. It had been very funny, but like most shows, once you get into season 7 or 8, you pretty much run out of your ideas. But it was just mean, and I could not imagine anybody ever feeling any sympathy for the characters on Family Guy at all. Any of them, none of them. You don't like any of them. They're all awful, awful, awful people. And the person who's the most awful person, at least on the surface, Quagmire, is the one who I have the most sympathy for, and I suppose most people did too. But Futurama, on the other hand, is astonishingly gentle in a way. And it all comes down to Fry's character. If you haven't seen the show, I know this is a little odd, but I won't be talking about it for too long. But the spiky hair is the Fry haircut, Fry is such a good-natured idiot. Homer Simpson's kind of a good-natured idiot, but there's something about Fry. He's just such a... He's been in love with this character, Leela, for 10 seasons, which is 13, 14 years, because there was a big hiatus there. And finally, after, 9 years of chasing the girl, he gets the girl. And every time I see it, it just makes me happy. And, these episodes, some of these episodes where they go in time, he moved forward. Fry, the story of Futurama, is a pizza delivery guy. On the eve of the Y2K thing he's in it, it's a gag gift. He's supposed to deliver a pizza to Icy Wiener at the cryogenics thing, and he pops a Coke, and right at midnight on the year 2000, he falls back into a freezer chamber. He's frozen for 1,000 years. He wakes up in the future. But he's such a sweet guy, and the story can be so sad about so many things. Anyway, I just wanted to mention it because, just speaking as a writer, it's so much harder to do. And the discipline, this applies to everything in life. Watching, at the end of the last episode, the final episode of Futurama, the end of it, the very first episode, he meets Leela, falls in love with her, and she can't stand him. And she can't stand him for something like 7, 8 seasons. I mean, it just despises him. He just keeps trying, keeps trying. Occasionally she'll kind of let a little bit of sunlight in there, but then no, it's always like, no, he fails or he messes up or he screws up or something. And so you got 6, 7 years of watching this poor guy pursue this woman. And I jump right to season 10. I'm back watching 9, 8, and 7 now to see where the thing changed. But really right around 8 or 9, somewhere in there, she starts falling for him. And then the final episode, she agrees to marry him. In fact, I think the final words in Futurama are "I do." I think that's the last line in Futurama, and it's such an investment. It's such an investment in the characters that when he finally gets the girl, even though it's an animated comedy, it's like rock on. It really made me happy, and I remember watching several episodes, and that thought came to me. It's like I really care about these characters, and I care about them because they're good people. And even the bad people are good people. I mean, Bender's one of the... Yeah, Fry's dog, exactly. Anybody who's seen the Fry's dog episode, forget it. You just can't... I defy you to watch that Fry's dog episode and not cry at the end of that. The thing about all of it is that even the worst character in that show, which is Bender. I mean, Bender is one of the most obnoxious, awful characters ever written in terms of his action, but time and 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 time again, virtually every episode, you get to see that he really does have a heart of gold inside that shiny metal acid backplate of his. He's just incredible. It's an incredible show. And I don't think I've told this too often, but when I got out here, I was a limo driver. I was trying to get movies made, and then I ended up, I had a friend who was named Fief Sutton, who I went to University of Florida with. And Fief started as just a writer on Cheers, then he became story editor, and then he became executive producer. And he asked me to do a couple spec scripts for Cheers, so I wrote a couple of spec scripts for Cheers, and I went in and had a bunch of meetings with the producing staff, as a potential comedy writer for Cheers. And I did 3 scripts for him, and they wouldn't have asked for a second one if they didn't like the first one. They wouldn't ask for a third if they didn't like the second. They canceled. That was the final season of the show. I'm quite convinced, genuinely convinced, if they'd done another season, I probably would have gotten a shot. Anyway, I would go into to these writing meetings with the Cheers staff, which I thought was, and I still maintain is the best written show ever on comedy. It's consistently just the best written show on TV, and it went out at the top of its game. And I'd come in with either setups or with a little couple beats of business or something, or a joke or something, and they would say, "Bill, this is beautifully constructed, and it's hilarious. It's just not really advancing the story, or it's not really doing anything to really, define the characters." And when I thought about the quality of the writing on so many of the other sitcoms, where if you got one kind of a titter out of the audience, it was like that was it. Congratulations, got a laugh out of the audience, and so you get another week. When I think about the discipline, that's really the word. The discipline of that. Of saying we're not going to do the cheap joke or even the okay joke. We're going to, if it's not firing all cylinders, then we'll rework it. They're not going to throw it away, just rework it. And there's one more thing I'll just say about sitcoms, because it's just an interesting aside before we get into all the talk about Donald Trump. And that's this one thing that's probably not unique to Cheers. In fact, I'd be amazed if it was unique to Cheers. And it's something that I certainly wasn't aware of, and you might just get a quick little giggle out of it from kind of a behind-the-scenes thing, is how sitcoms work and a potential problem with how they work. The modern multicam sitcom was invented by Desi Arnaz, invented by him. He knew his wife, Lucille Ball, had incredible comic timing. He knew what a comic genius she was. Also knew that, like most performers, she needed the feedback from the audience. She needed timing is timing because there's a feedback. It's like, wait, there's the laugh. Then there's a reaction to the laugh. And Desi knew that he couldn't really get that without an audience. But how do you shoot a show with an audience? Never been done before. There had been shows shot before an audience that were completely live, like a radio show, and then maybe recorded. And then sitcoms like Leave It to Beaver or Gilligan's Island or whatever were shot on camera, though those came after Lucy. Gilligan did, certainly. And so you would have a laugh track because you need that. The audience needs it. If you take a laugh track out of a show, it's incredible how dead it sounds. So Desi Arnaz invented this idea of inviting an audience into the studio, shooting it kind of like a play, but he knew he couldn't just go back. He couldn't just do, okay, we'll do the wide shot, now let's cut, and we'll do the scene again. We'll do Lucy's camera, and then we'll cut, and then we'll do the scene again, and we'll do Desi's camera. They wouldn't sit for that, and the laughs would go away after the first one. So he basically invented this idea of having multiple cameras on the set, and then not shooting it in one take, but shooting it in 2 or 3 or 4 takes, basically. I mean, you really don't stop very often. If you go to a modern sitcom now, for Cheers taping would be 2.5, maybe 3 hours, and they'd get most of it in one. Every now and then there'd be a blown line or something, and they'd have to go back and pick it up, but they'd get it almost all in one, then there'd be break and set up a new scene. But it's very entertaining to watch from an audience. Here's the point of me telling you all this. I'd never thought about this before, but it's an interesting bug. It's like a glitch in the system. And the glitch is this. You'd write a killer script. Not saying I did, but Fief would write brilliant scripts, and you'd come in with this brilliant killer script. And like I said, I'm sure this is true for all sitcoms, not just Cheers. And so what happens is you usually, let's say you tape on I guess they taped on a Monday, so Sunday night would be off, something like that. No, I don't know. Let's just say they tape on a Friday. So they do the read-through on Monday, and that means the cast sits there at a table in their regular street clothes. And I've been to a table read of Futurama. It was really brilliant, really fun. Because my friend Maurice LaMarche works on that show. Thank you, Mo. He does a voice of Kip and Morgo and Lure and all the rest. So the actors get the scripts and they read them, and they haven't seen them before. And a table read is a blast because everybody's getting the script for the first time. Everybody's casual and calm, and they're in their regular street seats, but they get to be their characters. They don't know the lines yet. They're just reading them. And since no one's heard it before, and the director's seen it before, but now he gets, all the inflections. It's hilarious. It's just fun. It's a great time. It's probably the most fun of the whole week sequence is the first table read, especially if you get a good script. So everybody's happy, man. This thing's really, really, really going, and everything's just, bam, just hammered, and everybody's great, and they're really excited. So that's day one. So they get into day two. They get on the set. They start blocking out the action. They're blocking it. They're blocking it. They're blocking it. And they say the lines, and they're still giggling and a little smiling a little bit and so on. Now you're on day three, and they're working the lighting and getting all the costume and all the rest of the stuff, finessing everything, getting ready. Now they've set the lines 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times and so on. And then by the time they get to Thursday or 4 days in, the actors start to lose confidence in the script because they've said it so many times that it starts to feel flat. And what I'd heard several times was somewhere before they do the actual taping, they would generally go in and monkey around with the script and stuff to tweak it a little bit, make it sound different. But in my opinion, I've seen some of these changes, it was invariably worse. Because when you got a guy who spends, a month or whatever, however many weeks writing a script, he's getting everything just right. And you start throwing last minute changes in there, the timing, the structure's not as good. But they had to do that commonly to keep the kind of freshness there so that when they did the actual tape day, they had something that the actors could feel was still kind of fresh. And that's, a small little bug that I'd never really thought about before, but all kinds of things happen behind the scenes. Last thing I'll say about this subject, and we'll get into the questions, is I think I mentioned this relatively recently, but another great thing about Cheers was pointed out to me as soon as I got in there, and that is this. If you were to walk into the studio and where Cheers is, and this is something you can do at home if you happen to be a fan of television or history of TV, my understanding is that the bar in Cheers, so next time you watch Cheers at home, just look at that physical space where the bar is in that stage, on that sound stage. That bar occupies the exact same physical space as Lucy and Ricky's living room. They're shot on the exact same stage, on the same studio, in the same location. It's just kind of cool if you think about it. I think it's really cool. The idea that there's Lucy's living room and, 20 years, 30 years later, whatever, we're going to build a bar around this right physical spot. And instead of it being Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, who is the unsung hero of television comedy, he just invented it out of whole cloth, is my understanding. There sits Norm and Cliff and Sam and all the rest. I wrote 3 spec scripts for Cheers, and they were all the same structure. I always did a Frasier A plot and a Cliff B plot. Those to me were the most fun characters. They were really, really so beautifully defined that they almost wrote themselves. They did for me anyway. All right, anyway, let's get going. We got a lot of stuff to cover here on episode 101. And as I said, kind of a meat and potatoes episode because we haven't taken any questions from the audience for a while. Lots and lots and lots of things have happened since we've done the last couple shows. So here we go. I think I've got 4, at least 4 on Trump, and probably a couple I didn't copy. So I'll just kind of read them and deal with them, and we're going to have to move a little bit because we got a bunch of questions. So see if I can discipline myself here. First one on Trump comes from David Lane. He says, what does the emergence of Trump mean to the future of conservatism? Does he replace free markets with protectionism? Does he fracture the coalition between libertarians, defense hawks, and social conservatives? I don't know, David. I know that Donald Trump is not a conservative, and he is getting stronger and not weaker. And the reason he's getting stronger and not weaker is because he fights. I think I mentioned this on one of the trifectas. Abraham Lincoln had gone through 6 or 7 generals trying to find somebody who would command the Army of the Potomac, which was a giant hammer, incredibly, probably without question, without question, the finest army on the face of the earth in terms of equipment and numbers and everything else. He couldn't find anybody who would fight that army, and he had seen U.S. Grant have some success out west in Fort Donelson and so on, and Shiloh, and he was going to bring him east to command the Army of the Potomac. In fact, command all of the Union armies. And a bunch of people who had objected to Grant, because Grant started out, I think, as a lieutenant or captain in the war, basically said, he's drunk. And he was a drunk. He was a drunk. They kept bad-mouthing him, and Lincoln kept hearing all these negative reports about Grant. And Lincoln finally just threw up his hands and turned to these people and said, I can't spare this man. He fights. And that's why I think Trump's numbers are so good. He fights. I don't think he's... Look, anybody who's given money to the Hillary Clinton campaign and who's in favor of universal health care, provided by the government, just that alone, just the health care alone, if you believe in government-sponsored, universal, single-payer health care, you are by definition not a conservative. I can't see any way to square those two things. It's the antithesis of what we believe. So he's not a conservative, but he fights. And he is a businessman. And so we have to ask ourselves, what does this mean? Ray Schneider says, does Trump fade or grow? Will he either kill or enhance his candidacy? What will either kill or enhance his candidacy? A month ago, I would have told you this Trump thing be over by now. It's gotten bigger, and it's gotten bigger because he fights. And as I see him fight, I find myself softening towards him. I find him more appealing because it's not like this is a contradiction for me or I'm changing my opinions on things. I'm enormously concerned about his philosophical background. I'm very concerned about a lot of his rhetorical excesses. However, we've been saying that the pop culture is everything, that the reason that the Republicans for the last 7-8 years now have not stopped this guy is because they're all suffering from Stockholm syndrome. They can't attack Obama because they're afraid. They're afraid of the press. They're afraid of what they're going to be called. Romney couldn't run on the fact that he had $250 million because he was afraid. He was afraid that they would make him out to be a rich guy and an evil guy. So Donald Trump Romney never released his tax returns until very late. And when he was questioned about his money, well, I don't know, gee whiz, Donald Trump is not ashamed or afraid of being rich. He's not afraid or ashamed of the press. And when I saw him out there, taking a question from CNN, it was a set-up question. He basically said, there's 10 protesters outside and 5,000, whatever the response was, 5,000 people, and now there's 10 protesters outside. The fact that you would lead with a question is just absurd. Where are you from? CNN? And then he did something like this, CNN. You people don't cover anything accuracy. So it's kind of said like you're like a joke. And the room went nuts. And I went nuts too, because it's this combination of the news media, which you can kind of center in New York, and the whole Hollywood. When I say Hollywood, I mean things like The Daily Show, the whole culture, the pop culture scenes centered out here in Hollywood. He's going right to the source of the problem, and he's not backing down. That is very, very powerful. Now, needless to say, I'm not pleased about a number of things that Donald Trump has done and a lot of his positions. I'm not pleased about them at all. I don't think that this, hey, ship 25 million people out is, I'm not going to say it's not doable. I think people say, well, that's impossible. I think that's a ridiculous thing to say. Of course it's possible. Building a fence possible? Absolutely it's possible. I don't have any problem with in fact, I'm strongly in favor of a border fence. I am not in favor of just shipping 25 million people out not because it can't be done, but because there's a better way to deal with this. I live in California. I live in Southern California. I'm surrounded by Mexicans. I don't know how many of them here legally or not, but I'll tell you one thing. The Mexicans that I run into in restaurants or the people who I meet every day are not only some of the nicest people I've ever met, they're some of the hardest working people I've ever met. They're hard-working people. They're very hard-working people. And if they want to come here as guest workers, I think they should stay as guest workers. If they want to become U.S. citizens, I think there should be a pathway for them, and they get in line, and they wait, and they don't get in front of people who are already in line. But certainly, if you want to become a U.S. citizen and be admitted based on the same criteria as everybody else, I'm completely in favor of this. Put all that aside for a second, though. The question then becomes, if it is Donald Trump, well, would you vote for him? I would, in a heartbeat. I wouldn't say in a heartbeat. I would vote for him. Would I vote for him over Hillary Clinton? I'd vote for him in an instant over Hillary Clinton. I'd vote for him in an instant over Bernie Sanders. I'd vote for him in an instant over anybody on the other side of the aisle. Because right now, the critical thing in America, there's there's two things that are really, 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 really important, have to be fixed right away. One of them is a return to lawfulness on the part of the government. Donald Trump is not my first, second, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth choice for that. But the second thing we need to do is get this economy jump-started, because we need to show the American people the difference between 8 years of socialism and 1 year of the free market. And with the exception of Carly Fiorina, I can't imagine anybody who would be able to get this economy going who understands how businesses actually work. Now, he's obviously got a mercantilist streak. That's a problem. It's not as much of a problem as Hillary Clinton's soft communism or Bernie Sanders' actual communism. So I'd vote for Donald Trump as a Republican candidate over any of the Democrats if he was the nominee. And here's something that bears some discussion, because it's an important distinction. I said before, and I meant it, that I would not, however, vote for Jeb Bush. I would not. If it were Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton, or Jeb Bush and Bernie Sanders, I'm telling you, I will not vote for Jeb Bush. How can you say such a thing, Bill? How can you say such a thing? Well, I can say such a thing because I love my country, so let me make my case for you. We lost the 2012 election because we were handed the only guy who could not run on the only issue that could defeat Obama, which was Obamacare. We had the guy who invented Obamacare versus the guy who implemented Obamacare. So in 2008, we had a guy who basically 6 weeks before the election said to his inner circle, although not to the American people, because I think we deserve to know, John McCain essentially said, I'm not going to be the man who stands in front of America's first black president. Well, John, tell us publicly so we can find somebody who will. This is the problem. The reason Obama has gotten away with what he's gotten away with, the reason he's not impeached, is because the Republican leadership is not conservative. The Republican GOP leadership is the party of slightly less big government. And they are the problem. And if they were going to give us Jeb Bush, and if we were going to get another 4 years of this kind of Coke Light kind of thing, then there's no end to it, you see. We would become to the Republican Party, conservatives and Tea Party people would become to the Republican Party what black Americans are to the Democratic Party, which is a power base that they can basically just piss on as much as they want to for as long as they want to, with the absolute assurance that no matter how huffy we get and how much the rhetoric gets cranked up, we'll be there to vote for them at the end. And I will not be a part of this anymore. I won't. I will not. I would rather lose an election at the presidency level, or 2 or 3 or 4, than have a conservative party or start one. So the reason I could vote for Trump and not for Bush, even though Bush may be more conservative than Trump is that Jeb Bush is a cynical insider who is business as usual. It's the Beltway versus the American people. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is not a politician. He's not part of the GOP machine. He is, in fact, a loose cannon, and maybe a loose cannon is what you need to clear the decks, who knows. European intellectuals hate Donald Trump. They despise him, so that's a big point in his favor. That's definitely pushing me in his direction. I think he's a Trumpian. I think if it goes to the wire, and by the way, I don't think it will. I'm maybe proven wrong about this. I don't think he's going to last. I don't. I think he's strong now because there's so many candidates that the total vote is fractured over so many places that he's scooping up a lot of the people who've, not really decided, I don't much like any of this. But as this field starts to narrow down from, 163 Republican candidates, it'll eventually get down to 100, then it'll get down to 20, then it'll get down to 10. Once it starts to get around 6 or 7 or so, you're going to start to see some clear positions. And then once you do that, I think he's going to fade. And if he doesn't, he doesn't. I think Donald Trump would whip Hillary Clinton. And the reason he would whip her is because, unlike the last two candidates that we've had as Republicans, he would fight. Hillary Clinton would have to take questions from Donald Trump, and Donald Trump wouldn't care what people think. That's what I like about him. He doesn't care. He doesn't have to. And he would destroy Bernie Sanders. By the way, if Hillary Clinton drops out of this race because she's in prison, I don't see any way that the Democrats can win. This will be what they put on my gravestone, because obviously we haven't figured in on the stupidity of the Republican Party as a party. I'm sure we'll find a way to blow it. But honestly, she has 30 years of liberal high hopes on her, and they don't transfer. And not only are Hillary's backers leaving her in large numbers, so are Jeb's. And so this gigantic thing that I feared the most for the future of the country, not even the individual policies of either Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton, or even so much even the fact that they're such insiders. The thing that I was filled with loathing of was this idea that we get dynasties now. We have the House of the Bushes and we have the House of the Clintons, and then we have the Clinton 1, and then Bush 1, and then Clinton 2, Bush 2, Bush 3, Clinton 3, Clinton 4, Clinton 5, Bush 6. No, I don't think either of them's going to be the nominee. And just as a quick parenthetical, Hillary Clinton is in actual trouble. This thing grows every day. And it's interesting, isn't it, that the FBI is investigating and uncovering these records on the part of Hillary Clinton when they didn't uncover them on the part of Eric Holder, or they didn't uncover them on the part of Lois Lerner, or they didn't uncover them on the part of anybody else who Barack Obama throws his cloak of invisibility over. Now, I think it's pretty clear that Barack Obama wants Hillary Clinton to fail. And I think he wants her to fail, not for any giant strategic political reason, certainly not for the future of the Democratic Party. He's left the Democratic Party in ruins, as they're about to discover. I think Barack Obama wants Hillary Clinton to go down because Barack Obama does not want anybody to outshine Barack Obama. We had our first historic president, and that's got to be preserved. You can't have one historic president followed by another historic president, right? That would be less historic. And you don't want Obama to be bookended by Clintons. I think this whole thing is happening because Obama's secretly encouraging it to happen. I think she's going down. And listen, let me just say one more thing about this Clinton thing. I got a question coming up here. I'll just jump to it while I'm on it. Matthew Lloyd says, why aren't more conservative politicians calling for Hillary's head over the email scandal? If she were Republican, she would have been shamed out of office or arrested by now. She wouldn't have been shamed out of office. She would have been arrested. The reason that conservatives aren't calling for Hillary's head is because, like everybody else, with the exception of Trump or one or two others, Carly's real good about this too. They don't want to be perceived as misogynist. See, this is the term that we've been using, but nobody really understands how it works. This is what prepping the battle space means. When you spend 2 or 3 years talking about a war on women that doesn't exist, and then it comes time to actually criticize the woman candidate for the Democratic Party, then they can say, see. They're doing the same thing with this Black Lives Matter, by the way. They're making it impossible for the police to function. That's a whole different story. So, she's got all of this lifetime worth of goodwill on the part of liberals, and she's going down because Obama's letting her go down. He's going to let this thing happen. I don't know that she gets out of this. Not only do I not think she gets out of it in terms of the email thing, but I don't know how her image recovers. She looks so awful. She's so thin-skinned and so petty, and her jokes, and she looks like the guy, looks like the Martin Short character on Saturday Night Live. It's like, Mrs. Clinton, did you, many of these emails that you claimed, weren't classified were in fact classified, and she's almost like, I know that. You don't think I know that? I know that. I know that. It's just like one giant. I've never seen a worse liar. Hillary Clinton is Bill Clinton without the charm and the ability to lie well. All of the corruption, none of the charm. The Donald Trump phenomenon and the Bernie Sanders phenomenon is a reaction against the horrific general nature of business as usual politics. And this is the last question on Trump that I took. I guess there might have been one or two others. Sorry if I missed yours. Matthew Lloyd says, is the rhetoric stating a vote for Trump means abandoning your principles hyperbole or truth? Do you think he really does love America and wants to make her great again? If so, does that impact your willingness to vote for him if he gets the nomination? I'll do that backwards. If he is the nominee of the Republican Party, I'll vote for him. If Jeb Bush is, I won't, for reasons I just explained. Do I think he really loves America and want to make it great again? I categorically do. And that alone is enough to vote for him, because Bernie Sanders doesn't love this country. He doesn't love anything about this country. He thinks the economic system that this country is a champion of is evil and wrong. He wants to destroy it. Hillary Clinton doesn't love this country. She certainly doesn't love the people of this country. She loves the power of the country. We came, we saw, he died. She likes that kind of thing. She likes flying around on jets like Barack Obama does and Bill does. Bill did it just for the tail. Bill just did it because it was, so you want to talk about the ultimate pickup opportunity. Being the most powerful man in the world means all of a sudden that this, chipmunk-faced, fast-talking guy who would have been much more appropriate as a used car salesman in Little Rock, gets Sharon Stone's attention. So we all know why Bill wanted to be president, and Hillary just wants to do it for the power, and I think Hillary's motivation is to get back at Bill. I think that's pretty much it. But I think Donald Trump does love this country. I'm not trying to suggest Donald Trump's doing it for the country. I think Donald Trump's doing it for Donald Trump. That's all Donald Trump does, is things for Donald Trump. But Donald Trump does love this country, and Donald Trump has a reason to love this country. See, Donald Trump started, I don't know if he started with nothing, but he didn't start with what he had. He was not Donald Trump the third, He basically built things out of, he did build it. He loves this country. The country's made him very rich. He's employed a lot of people, paid a lot of taxes, and a lot of people are working for him and getting paychecks because of Donald Trump. So I do think he gets this country economically, and I think he does love this country. And that's enough reason to vote for him in a field as sparse and as treasonous as this one is on the other side of the aisle. I think that'll do it for Trump today. Susan Speakman says, we got a couple political questions kind of clustered here. What do you think of a Cruz Fiorina ticket? I think it's the dream ticket, baby. I think it's the dream ticket. As I said earlier, there are two imperatives in this country. First of all, law has to return to the government. The government, forget about the spending and forget about the waste and forget about the encroachment of federal regulations and all of it. The number one problem in the country right now is that there is no law. And by the way, Obama mandates this. He's going to mandate the Iran deal. We don't need congressional approval for this. His staffers say, Obamacare's, the website's not working. We spent $1 billion on a website doesn't have a shopping cart. Well, then let's just delay the opening for 6 months. You don't get to dictate law like this, Mr. President. And does he have the power, I suppose he does, to arbitrarily rename Mount McKinley into Denali? I'm not saying it's not a good idea, but does he have the right just, no, we're not going to call it Mount McKinley anymore. I have decreed that it is now Mount Denali. And furthermore, I've decreed that Mount Rushmore is now Mount Sitting Bull. And I've also decreed that the Washington Monument shall be called the Obama Spire. And I also decree that that the state of California should be renamed into whatever I want to call it, Spanish-American Warville. Does he have the power to do this? I don't know that he does. And if he does, where did he get it? How does he just go around saying Yellowstone National Park is now going to be called Michelle National Park? Because I think it would be a good idea. So let it be written. So let it be done. I don't get why people just put up with this. So lawfulness, right? So Ted Cruz, I mean alone among these candidates, Ted Cruz understands this country philosophically better than anyone, certainly back to Reagan, and you could probably make the case even better than Reagan. He was memorizing the Constitution when he was like 13 or something. His parents escaped from actual communism, where Bernie Sanders wants to take us. Ted Cruz is running from, and so are millions of other people. Bernie's the only one going the other way. Bernie Sanders is the only living person who would get into a raft and go from Fort Lauderdale to Havana to get to the free health care. He'd be the only raft in the entire world going the other way. And that's why Bernie Sanders does that, by the way, because if Bernie Sanders wasn't the only man in the world who was going to get in a raft and go from Fort Lauderdale to Havana, if that wasn't who Bernie Sanders was, then we never would have heard of Bernie Sanders, right? He'd be just another old white-haired, lunatic, blowhard, ancient guy. He'd just be another cranky nutcase barking out this stuff about 90% tax rates. The fact that he's claiming that this is better than anything else is the only reason he's got any media presence at all. And it's a heck of a thing about the Democratic Party to say that this guy may be the nominee when he's calling for outright open socialism, 90% tax rate, confiscation of property. It's unbelievable. He's not going to be president. I just don't see a world where that happens. So Cruz would get the government back into a state of lawfulness, And then the vice president would get the economy into a state of motion. You know, Carly Fiorina, I imagine, would get out there. She knows how business works, and she'd start making these regulations reasonable. I don't want a world with no regulations. I want a world with a limited number of reasonable regulations that are designed to do things in very specific little areas, and that's all. And I think Carly would get out there and get the government out of the way. Carly Fiorina, Ted Cruz ticket would be, you know, Reagan, the Ronald Reagan miracle was in a great deal, in a large part, I mean to say, as impressive as it was because of the contrast. If Ronald Reagan had come in after Nixon, it would have been a heck of an improvement. But to come in after Carter and all of the incompetence and all the malaise and all of the economic slowdown and all of the military, impotence, that's what made Reagan look so good. And if Cruz or Fiorina were to come in after Obama, I think the contrast would be even higher. So I'd love to see that. It'd make my day. Ted Cruz is my favorite candidate by far. I like Scott Walker very much. I like Carly very, very much. People said, well, they're all very low. They're down at 5%. Okay. Unlike Jeb Bush, who was supposed to be at 50%, these guys knew they're going to start small. Ted's raised a fair amount of money, and I think I don't see Fiorina or Cruz or Walker dropping out of this race. I don't know how well financed Walker is. However, if I'm Jeb Bush and I should be at 50% and I'm 5, I'd be like the rest of his backers. I'd be looking for the exits. And I think Fat Boy's on his way out too. There were some things I liked about Chris Christie, but I think Chris Christie cost us the election in 2012. When the guy who gives the keynote speech at the Republican National Convention gets up there, throws his arm around the president the day before the election or 2 days before the election, says, "This guy is swell. He's doing an incredible job. Wow." Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris. I hope the second I saw that, I just wanted to send him a lifetime supply of bacon-covered donuts. And a lot of them. Yeah. Anyway, so yes, I love the Cruz Fiorina ticket. I think it's time to change gears a little bit. So there's our little political section. Hey, we're moving along here. So now we get into stuff that's a little more fun. No, there's more on Bernie. Yeah, why not? Let's go to communism before we move into the world of happiness and joy. The question after this is related too. So here we go. Paul Sullivan says, as a college student, the amount of Bernie Sanders content my peers post is prolific. He may be nuts, but he seems sincere, which is why many people like him. Does he have a shot at the nomination? Would he be tougher in the opposition general election than Hillary? No, he would be much easier to defeat than Hillary. Because he's not going to get the women vote. If you have told half of the population that this is your moment, large numbers of that half of the population are going to believe you. If Hillary Clinton drops out, I think it's done for them. And I don't think Elizabeth Warren automatically gets Hillary love. I know some women who are conservative women, well, maybe not conservative women, Republican women, who were thinking about voting for Hillary, back in 2008 and so on, because she's very competent, she's very capable, and she knows everything, and she'd be a qualified woman president. And they want to see a woman president. I don't blame them. If you want to see a woman president, vote for Fiorina, why don't you? Because that woman knows what she's doing, more or less. And if she goes away, it's all attached to Hillary, you see. Some of it goes to Elizabeth Warren, and some of it goes to Bernie Sanders, but Hillary is, 92, right? 24 years we've had Hillary on the scene as the young and then the middle-aged and now the frighteningly old kind of end of Raiders of the Lost Ark face-melting kind of force for women. And yeah. She goes, I think it's done for them. But so back to Bernie. I don't think Bernie would be tougher. I think Bernie'd get 20% of the vote, the crazy 20%. It'd be good to photograph the people that had Bernie bumper stickers on their cars or on their Bernie, I vote for Bernie pins or something, just because, we have limited mental health resources in this country, and that would be a way to kind of self-select out the people most in need. But here's the thing that was in that question that I like. When Paul Sullivan said he may be nuts, but he seems sincere, which is why many people like him. I'd rather see Bernie Sanders president than Hillary Clinton for two reasons. First of all, if you're going to get your communism, get it straight up. Don't hide it in Clintonism. Don't give it to us slowly. You want to make America a communist country and a socialist country. If you want to tax businesses at a 90% tax rate, then let's get it over with. If it turns out that the country is ready to give this a try, I'd rather have Bernie Sanders than Hillary Clinton for two reasons. First of all, when Bernie Sanders gets his 90% tax rate, he's going to discover what Hollande discovered in France when he tried a 75% tax rate, which is rich people will not pay 75% or 90% of their income. They will either leave because nothing is so mobile as a rich person, or they will simply stop doing what they do, which is generate wealth for themselves and for other people as well. They'll just stop. The guy who has a car dealership, he's got $70 million. He likes selling cars. He likes bringing another 20, 30 million, 2 million, 5 million, whatever a year. He'll just say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to give it to the government. I'm going to stop. And the 100 people I employ, too bad for them. They can all be on the government rolls now as payees instead of payers. And I've got $30 million in the bank. And if they're going to tax me on income at 90%, I'm not going to make any more income. I'm going to live on my savings and live on my capital gains. I'm going to live on all this other stuff, on my investments. You all can go pound sand. I don't blame them one little bit. That's what I would do too. But the second reason I would rather see Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton is because I do believe Bernie Sanders believes this. And ultimately, when you are a person who has some pride in your intellectual position and some concern about your consistency and about your dedication to the truth and honesty and so on, I look at Bernie Sanders as a guy who's completely wrong on just about everything economically. However, I think he's sincere, and I think he really believes it, and I think I genuinely think Bernie Sanders thinks his policies would be best for large numbers of people. Hillary Clinton doesn't believe in anything. She doesn't believe in anything other than sticking it to Bill. That's my personal opinion. But she certainly doesn't believe in anything more than Hillary Clinton. I think she's motivated by sticking it to Bill. But whatever her motivation is, it's not for the country. It's not for the love of the American people. She doesn't have a big vision about what's going to happen with it when she becomes president. She just wants the power. By the way, I hadn't really made this connection before, but there was another person on the historical scene not too long ago who wanted power at all expenses and didn't care how they got it, and that person's name was Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler hated the Jews. He had a real radical sense of things. And after the beer hall push in 23, I want to say it was, after he basically tried to steal power from the government and was nearly shot and killed by the police, he did his 13 months or 15 months in Landsberg prison. And when he came out, he realized that he could not take power by force if the army and the police were against him. And so Adolf Hitler compromised so many of the positions of the National Socialist Party and basically risked open rebellion for the second half of the 20s and all the way up into January of 1933 because he had to be in power. He wanted power. And if that meant getting into bed with the industrialists while the rest of the people in the National Socialist Party wanted to basically do what socialists do, which is go after the private businesses and distribute their money, then Hitler was with the businesses. And when it came time to pick a side on whether or not even the landed aristocracy from the First World War, whether their estates would be compensated and distributed to the people, which all the National Socialists wanted and which all the communist parties wanted, Hitler said, no, we're going to let the power structure stay with the power structure. He didn't care whether it was a violation of the principles he laid down in the National Socialist German Workers' Party in 21 or whatever it was. He just did what he had to do to get power. And she strikes me as the same way, doesn't believe in anything other than her own personal desire to tell other people what to do. I think Hillary Clinton is maybe the worst person on earth. I know somebody who she could probably walk hand in hand with all the way to the gates of hell in terms of that narcissistic, ego-driven, incompetent, treasonous, arrogant, nasty, mean-spirited, rotten, American-hating bunch of bastards. There's a pretty small group, and they're all in Washington in key positions. And related to this is a question from Jean Milcourt. Mycourt. Or McCord. Maybe it's Jean McCord. Who knows? What are your thoughts on Bernie Sanders, and how can anyone support him with a straight face after Greece and China? No one can. If you've read history, you can't support Bernie Sanders. If you don't know any history, he sounds like a great, nice guy. Not to mention the failures of socialism over the last century and the millions of deaths. See above comment. How can they say that's not really socialism, or he's a democratic socialist? How many people are just in denial? Lots of people, which leads to the next question, because I think these two things are related. Cameron Smith says, hey, Bill, could you please dispel the myth that communism works so well on paper? So there we go with Bernie, right? Bernie is basically saying that communism works great on paper, but it just hasn't been done right. If you ask Bernie Sanders if he's a socialist, which I would love to do, he says he is, he claims he is, he runs as a socialist. He'd say, yes, I'm a socialist. Then the next thing I would do is start to ask Bernie about the 30 million people that socialism killed in Russia, and the 7, 8, 10, 12 million people killed by socialism in Germany, and 50 million people killed by socialism in China, and the 7 million people killed by socialism in Vietnam, and the 3 million people killed by socialism in Cambodia. And I would ask him about all these people killed by socialists. And then he would say something to the effect of, well, you don't understand. See, that's not real socialism. They just weren't doing it right. And then I would say, well, sir, here's what's remarkable about that is that they called themselves socialists. Hitler called himself a National Socialist. The communists called themselves the Union of Socialist Soviet Republics. The socialist people in communist China, the People's Republic Army, it's all called themselves socialists. So since they all called themselves socialists and killed 100 million, 200 million people, you're calling yourself a socialist too. Number one, you wouldn't get me wearing a T-shirt that had the deaths of 100 million, 200 million people on it, no matter what I believed. But number two, you're going to have to tell us how your socialism is different. And he would talk about things like Sweden and so on. And I would say, well, Sweden is a fairy tale. Sweden doesn't exist. The idea of Sweden doesn't exist. Sweden is not an example of sustainable socialism because Sweden is not a socialist country in a vacuum. It is a socialist country, but the reason they can afford all of their health benefits and all their cradle-to-grave benefits, and they can retire people at 50 and all this stuff, is because they don't have to pay for defense against the giant Russian bear that is right at their doorstep. Sweden can be socialist because American taxpayers are paying for Sweden's defense. And if they had to put 3 aircraft carriers in the oceans, or 5, or whatever it took, and God knows how many number of air wings and armored divisions to protect themselves from the Russians, they wouldn't afford socialism, and neither could the French either, or the Germans, or anybody else. The reason they got their socialism is because we bought it for them. We bought it for them. We paid for their defense. They don't have to. No one's paying for the Russian defense other than the Russians. The Russians are paying big money for their defense. You look at Russia. Russia is a country that has fallen apart and is falling apart, collapsing everywhere into alcoholism and economic ruin and cronyism and the worst form of banditry kind of capitalism. And all of this is tolerated because they have to keep buying gear. And that gear is designed to take territory. And the territory they would take are called places like Poland and Finland. And Finland is not that far from Sweden. And if you don't realize that the Russians would attack Finland or Poland, you might want to look all the way back 70 years in history and find out, no, that's exactly what they will do. So Bernie is a fraud. His economic system is a fraud, and it brings poverty to everybody. Bernie doesn't care that everybody's lives would get worse. Bernie just wants to be the guy who said everybody's equal. See, there's nobody better than you. We're all miserable together. We all live in mud huts, and none of us have electricity, and we die at 30 from parasites and diseases, but at least nobody's living 10 years longer than another guy. At least there's nobody living to be 90 instead of 85 because he makes more money than you do. We'll all just die at 30 and imagine the wondrous, glorious equality. The problem, which leads me into the question I really wanted to get to here. Communism works so well on paper. The idea that it's this perfect political system is just, unfortunately seems to select the murderers and put them in positions of power, and that seems to be what happens all the time. Maybe we want to give it a different try? No. So let's look at it on paper. What does communism say on paper? Communism says 2 things on paper that I think bear examination because they're both horrible, naked lies. The first lie of communism is that if it's a cold night out and we're in the plains of North Dakota, and it's 35 degrees below zero, and we hear bleating out in the barn, and it turns out that one of our cows is sick. The idea of socialism is that one of us will go out there at 4 o'clock in the morning and 30 degrees below zero to take care of a cow that doesn't belong to us. That we would, in fact, all pitch in and work for the collective as hard as we would work for ourselves. And it just ain't so. It ain't so. It's obviously not so. It's obvious to you. It's obvious to me. All of the history of the world shows it. When Lenin rides in on his train and gives his big speech, or Mao does the long march, or Stalin does his thing, or Hitler seizes power, with the annexation, all this other stuff. Hitler was a bohemian loser who would not hold a job. Thought he was a great artist. And he never gave up those work habits, by the way. Stalin was a failed seminary student filled with murderous rage. So was Hitler. So was Mao. All these people, they come to lead these movements, these people's movements. We're just a person of the people. We all believe in this shared socialism. Does Stalin and Lenin and Mao and Hitler and Molotov and Ribbentrop and Goebbels and Goering and Himmler and does Yeshov and all of these murderers in the collective system come to their capitals and then go back and work in the fields that they came from or the mines that they came from? No. In the people's paradise of the Soviet Union, where everybody was equal, everybody was equally miserable except for the 5% of the nomenklatura, which was a word that meant the nomenclature literally in the Soviet Union. If you were going to amount to anything, and I mean anything, like be a college professor, your name had to be on an approved list called the nomenklatura. And this 5% of the population that got into power by saying power to the people, to hell with ruling parties, had their own limousines, had their own private department stores where there was actual stuff on the shelves, went to their private dachas, their little cottages out on the lake, and they lived just like any other royalty. They lived like bloodline aristocracy, or they lived like rich capitalists. It is human nature. And when somebody tells you that we are all going to be equal and just turn over everything to me, that person is going to be as well set up as as a guy who handed out forms in Chicago, who was hired to be the president of a law review at a major institution, never wrote a single law review, who showed no signs of competence, no signs of brilliance, no sign really of political skill, but now travels the world in his own 747 and does nothing but golf because he told people that he was going to make things equal and different. And they believed him. See, I'd respect Barack Obama. I'd still hate him, but I would respect him if he was, in fact, this socialist community organizer who wanted to bring change to America. But he isn't. He didn't. He didn't do Obamacare, which, remember, his signature legal achievement was not passed by him, was passed by Nancy Pelosi. He hovered above it in case it went down, and when it didn't go down, he took credit for it. $1 billion spent on a website that didn't have a shopping cart, but he didn't. His signature piece of legislation means the government forces people to pay insurance companies, which is what the progressives hate. They hate the idea of private insurance companies. Obamacare forces you to pay Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Humana, Kaiser. It forces you to pay corporations. That's his signature achievement in legislation, and it's because he doesn't care. If he actually cared, like I suspect Bernie Sanders cared, I'd be able to respect him as a person who I disagreed with vehemently and who was trying to destroy everything I love. But he doesn't care. He doesn't care. He wants to golf, man. Even that is so appalling to me, is that it's such a tawdry payoff. It's such a cheap payoff that, what this guy want? What does he want? What does Michelle want? Michelle wants to go and vacation on the south of France in places she could never, ever, 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 ever afford. Ever, 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 on other people's dime. And she wants to mock them and insult them while she's doing it. And Barack Obama wants to play golf in Tony locations in Hawaii and hobnob with movie stars. It's so petty. It's so small. It's such a tiny, tiny, tiny little man and such a tiny little payoff. If I was going to be president for personal reasons, I'd be president for personal reasons of taking America into a place where I could afford to go to Mars. At least it'd be like, well, what are you doing this for? Oh, I just want to go to Mars. You're gonna basically bend the country to your will because you want that? Yep. That's a kind of a personal, selfish thing, isn't it, Bill Whittle? It is. Yep, it is. It's a selfish, personal, horrible thing. But at least we're going to another planet. We're not going to go play golf on some Hampton, links with, fourth generation Kennedys and fly in my big jet. It's just sad. It's just pathetic. So communism doesn't work well on paper because people will not go out and take care of somebody else's cow the way they'll go out and take care of their own cow. That's the human issue. And the larger issue is the philosophical issue. Socialism means essentially that everybody ends up with the same thing. I'm going to say it again because I say it 1,000 times. The most important argument in the world right now is the one of all the ones I ever make. This is the argument. There is no such thing as equality. There are two different kinds of equality, and they are mutually exclusive. When somebody talks to you about equality, you need to stop them right there and talk to them about what kind of equality are they talking about. Are they talking about equality of opportunity or equality of result? Equality under the law is real equality. Equality under the law says that the homeless person on the corner does not have to be subjected to laws, regulations, rules, or so on that Donald Trump doesn't have to be subjected to. It says if Donald Trump commits a murder, he should be investigated as thoroughly, prosecuted as enthusiastically, and punished as severely as a homeless person on the street. And I believe that, with some exceptions, needless to say, that the rule of law is still pretty much equally enforced on America. But when you're talking about outcomes, when you're talking about things that have an outcome, like an economic equality, you have to ask, are we talking about equality of opportunity or equality of result? Equality of opportunity means everybody has the same chance. We don't have perfect equality of opportunity here. If I heard that somebody was being held back because they're black, I'd be outraged about that, and I would do what I had to make sure that didn't happen. Same as if they're held back because they're white or Asian or a woman or gay or whatever. Equality of opportunity means there's a starting line and everybody's toes are on that starting line. You don't get to start 30 yards forward if you're rich. You don't have to start 50 yards back if you're black. Equality of opportunity means everybody has the same chance. There's nothing you can do about how you enter the world, but what you come to do with the world is entirely up to you. So equality of opportunity means everybody has the same chance. Equality of result means that everybody crosses the finish line at the same time. And the problem with that is if you have 100 people, look, this is so simple. There's this argument 1,000 times. It's real easy. Take 100 people out of a football stadium, take them to the field. Just take 100 people, randomly pick them out of the football stadium, men, women, children, all of them. Put them down on one goal line and line them up. And then have a starter pistol and fire it. That's called equality of opportunity, and that's what I believe in. And tell them to run as fast as they can to the other goal line, 100-yard dash, right? And if you take 100 people out of a football stadium and you fire that starting gun, 100 people are going to run as fast as they can, and they will all cross the finish line differently. The fastest person in that 100 will cross the finish line first, and the slowest person in that 100 will cross the finish line last. Now, they all cross at different times. There's nothing equal about it, but there is a fundamental equality in that they both start from the same place, they have the same chance, and. This is the moral case for capitalism and the moral case for equality of opportunity. All of them are free to run as hard as they want to or not run at all. In other words, if you don't want to give it your best, if you want to slack your way through life, if you want to jog, if you want to walk, if you want to meander and loiter and make a pass at the cheerleaders on the sideline, you can. There's nobody with a gun or a whip making you run as fast as you want to. You run as fast as you want to. If you want to dawdle, well, then somebody's going to get even further ahead of you. That's your decision because you dawdled, right? And it means that you are running with the gifts that you've been given and you're doing your best, and everybody crosses as fast as they can, and the total average time, if you had everybody motivated to run, now think about this, this is important. If you were to take the total time, not the average time, I should say, the sum times of everybody's race, you add them all up, that will be the lowest combined time. In other words, that is how the race is run the fastest. Everybody goes fast as you can, boom. That's capitalism, that's equality of opportunity. Equality of result means they all want to have to cross the finish line at the same time. We don't want somebody to cross ahead of somebody else, you see, because that person might have more of a nice house or a nice car, and that would be unfair. So in order to be fair, we want everybody to cross the finish line at the same time, which means everybody makes more or less the same pay, everybody has more or less the same housing, everybody has more or less the same bus that they ride on because cars are evil, and so on and so on and so on, and we live in this perfect equality of result. That's a form of equality, it is. Everybody is equally rewarded at the end of the day or at the end of the race. What's the problem with this morally and physically? The moral problem with it is if you put those same 100 people from that football stadium on that same goal line and you fire that same starting gun so that they all have to cross at the exact same time on the other end, just think about this because it's very, very, very simple. Just look down on the field. What has to happen for them all to cross at the same time? Every single person in there, except for one, 99 people out of the 100 have to be held back by force because the race can only proceed at the race of the slowest runner. You cannot run faster than your best. So the person who is the slowest or goofing off the most will be the rate at which everybody has to finish, because everybody finishes equally, which means we all finish at the rate of the slowest runner. And that means not only do we get a slower result out of the race, a much slower result, not only do we get less actual achievement, which is distance over time, but it also means that to the other 99 people, they have to have a gun to their head, forcing them to do less than they can in the name of equality. It's evil. It's not fair. It's not just. It is not just that Ben Carson, who may have studied for 25 years of his life in order to save your daughter if she gets hit by a car, because he knows how to operate on her brain and save her life. It is not fair to Ben Carson for the work that he does and the amount of studying he's done and the amount of effort and time and dedication. He's never off the phone, ever. He's always on duty. There's always on call, these guys. It is not fair to him to be paid the same amount of money as a guy who hangs out in a 7-Eleven smoking doobies out back. It's not fair. It's wrong. It's evil. It's unjust and it's unfair, and everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. And if Ben Carson is in fact entitled to make more money for saving your daughter's life because he studied for 25 years and has incredible skill, then who gets to tell Ben Carson what he can spend his money on? We have to take that money away from him? If we take his money away from him, he never got the money. It's not his money. He's not rewarded for his efforts. It's evil. It's wrong. It's stupid. It means everybody suffers. Everybody panics. It means there are no brain surgeons. There's nothing but 7-Eleven clerks in a world like that. And this is what Bernie Sanders and the Democratic Party of the United States of America want to foist on the American people. And it's got to stop, because it's evil. It's evil. It's evil. It's evil. And it's wrong. There. Just write that down. Now we can get out of the political stuff and have some fun with some other questions. We're doing all right on time here. Yeah, not bad. Jennifer Lechner says, Bill, I'm running the University Observatory. Hooray! Congratulations. By the way, I should put up a post when I maybe remember to do it tonight or this weekend. My Facebook friend, James Aubrey, who I worked with, he was 13 years old, and I was probably 15, 8 years older than that. I was probably 20, 22, something like that. The Miami Planetarium, apparently, Miami Museum of Science Space Transit Planetarium closed its doors, I think, last weekend. It opened in 1966. I got there in 1973 and closed in 2015. It's not a bad run for that old Spitz projector. James took some really beautiful pictures of the star projector, and I grew up with that machine. I mean, that machine and I spent, since I still feel attached to it, I ought to feel attached to it. I've got a neural network to run that thing. What would that be? 43 years, something like that. It's a long time. Hang around with a piece of perforated aluminum. It's a fine machine. I'll do a little post on that, I think. Maybe I'll write an essay on that. It'd be a good thing. I haven't written an essay for a while. Anyway, I digress. Jennifer, congratulations on running the university observatory. I ran the Southern Cross Observatory with some other people in the student section for many years. So here's the question. I'll be setting up telescopes and talking to people about the cool stuff they'll be seeing. Do you have any advice from your planetarium days for keeping an audience captivated by astronomy? What makes people go wow the most and what bores them? Great question. I'll give you a one-word answer, and then we'll open up from there, Jennifer. What keeps people, make them go wow the most? Saturn. Period. Saturn. I'd like to say the planets, the moons, deep sky objects, numbers. No. Saturn. It's Saturn. Saturn moves so slowly across the background stars. It is obviously the farthest of the six original planets visible to the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn V, because we're on number 3. So Mercury was visible in the naked eye, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And they all move across the background stars. The word planet comes from the Greek word for wanderer. Because Saturn moves so slowly, because it's by far the furthest one out. And by the way, it's pretty much almost a geometric progression. Jupiter's about twice as far as Mars. Saturn's about twice as far as Jupiter. Uranus about twice as far as Saturn. Just solar system gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I have to stop for 1 second because I heard an interesting, fascinating fact. I wanted to talk about this. People talk about the planets, and you see the solar system, and here's the sun, and you see the planets and all these other things. The planets are never to scale to the sun, because you barely see the planets if you had the sun to scale. Jupiter's golf ball compared to it, or less. Marble, maybe. Here's something that you might not know that's an interesting fact. If you were to take the Earth and the Moon, which we think are pretty close together, but they're not. They're pretty far apart. I'd seen this statistic and I thought about it because I grew up with astronomy. Oh, yeah, absolutely right. It just never occurred to me. Think about this. If you were to put the Earth here, and then you were to take Mercury and have it touch the Earth, and then have Venus touch Mercury, and Mars touch Venus, and then Jupiter touch Mars, Saturn touch Jupiter, Uranus touch Saturn, and Neptune touch Uranus. If you were to have all the planets touching up against the Earth, all of them would fit inside the moon's orbit. In other words, all of the planets of the solar system together, side by side, don't reach to the Earth's moon. That's how empty the solar system is. That's how tiny these planets are. I think Sagan once referred to the solar system as the sun plus, they referred to the solar system as Jupiter plus debris. It's the sun plus debris. It's just a little scattering of dust. It's incredible how little matter there is in space. Anyway, that was a small digression. Here's your answer, Jennifer. Saturn. Saturn is the answer. Saturn moves very slowly against the stars. It moves so slowly against the stars that for all intents and purposes, we can consider it a fixed star in terms of when it's visible. Now, when Saturn is duly aligned with the sun, Saturn rises at sunrise, Saturn sets at sunset. You don't get to see Saturn. But the sun moves 15 degrees a month, I want to say. So the sun the sun appears to move. We're moving around the sun. So after a month, Saturn is 15 degrees behind the sun in the morning. It rises an hour before the sun does. And then after another month, it rises 2 hours before the sun. So my point is, if you're ready to get up early and stay up late, you can see Saturn most nights out of a year. But if Saturn is in the sky, it's not terribly striking. It's kind of a pale yellow. It's definitely yellow. And rather pale, it's not striking image. But you put Saturn in a telescope, and it's game over for anybody. It was game over for me, but I can back up that anecdotal evidence. I got a telescope when I was 12 in Bermuda. Just before I left for Florida, I saw one. I was waiting for a bus. I saw one in a camera shop, and I looked at this thing, and I was bored. I don't particularly care for cameras. Never really have been much of a photography guy. And I saw this thing on top of the glass, case in this photography shop, and it was a tripod, and it looked odd for a telescope because I thought it would be a little longer and thinner. And I bent it down to look at the lens on the big end of the telescope, and I said, well, there's no lens here. And I looked down into this open hollow tube, and at the far end was a mirror, concave mirror, like a makeup mirror. And I said, well, how the hell does that work? Turns out that for a telescope to work, you have to concentrate a large amount of light and focus it into a small amount. And that's called light gathering capability. It determines the resolution, how fine an image you get. The more light you gather and shrink down to a small space, the brighter the image, and also the more detail in the image. It's not just brighter, it's also resolution. The bigger the tube, the more light you gather. And now we have, when I was growing up, a 200-inch telescope at Palomar was the biggest one. We're much bigger than that now. So the more we bring in, the more we can gather, and the more we can magnify, and so on. And so the way you can gather light is with a big lens. A big lens will focus light, but a mirror will bounce it to a focal point as well. Newton invented that. That's called a Newtonian reflector. And I saw this mirror back there, a perfect mirror, has to be. I went, wow. So I talked to my dad, and he said, well, we'll get it for Christmas. You work, pay half. We'll get the other half for Christmas. So we did. And I took that telescope out on Christmas night, and I was outside as it was getting dark, and I'm looking around, and I'd bought Donald Menzel's Field Guide to the Stars and Planets when I first saw the telescope months before Christmas, read it, and again and again and again, memorized everything. So I'm outside. I got a pretty good idea what the constellations are looking for. I'm looking up here, and it's starting to get dark, and it's finally getting dark enough to see what's going on. I look up there, and I think that's pretty sure that's Arcturus. And I turned the telescope on it, and sure enough, what looked like a bright orange star in the telescope was a very bright orange star. Didn't look any different at all, just brighter. And I think, okay, if that's Arcturus, I'm pretty sure that must be Saturn. So got the little guide telescope with a wider field, because the big telescope's looking very, very narrow, the size of less than a dime. The other one's a little wider field, so you use the little telescope on the side to get it close, put it in the crosshairs. Now your big telescope should be more or less aligned. So I could see that there was something that looked different about Saturn. I couldn't really see it in the little guide telescopes, like 3-power telescope on the side. And then a Newtonian reflector, not only is there no lens, but you actually look at it at a right angle. Well, you do that with reflectors too. Instead of getting behind the tube, there's a little mirrored thing for the eyepiece. It's much easier to look down than it is to get under this thing. So I got the little eyepiece in there, low power eyepiece, wide field eyepiece, and I'd done the alignment just right on this thing, and I put that eyepiece in there and I racked it into focus, and I saw something that was the size of about a small BB, maybe smaller than a BB, and the rings around it, and I just let out a gasp, and that was it. It was like the Thunderbirds. I'll never forget that moment. Ever. Ever, ever, ever. It was like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And those exact words, Jennifer, I've heard probably 1,000 times. I was running the observatory at the Miami Space Transit Planetarium at the Museum of Science, Southern Cross Observatory there, with a bunch of other nerds and weirdos and vampires. And when Saturn was in the sky, we would have the telescope trained on Saturn, and just regular people who had no interest in astronomy would look down into that eyepiece, and they would see Saturn, and every single one of them would say, are you kidding me? Many people, I mean hundreds of people over the years, were convinced that that had to be a slide, that we had a picture taped to the thing and that we had a backlit or something. And we would say, no, here, we'll move it around, we'll show you. Saturn in a telescope is magic. It's just magic because it is the only solar system object. It's the only, with the exception of the moon, it's the only object you can look at with a small telescope that lives up to its advertising. That's a fair statement. I hadn't really thought of it that way. Saturn is the only object you can see in a small telescope that lives up to its advertising, where you look at it and you go, okay, by God, that's what I had in mind. And this is a really interesting question as I get into it, because I never really thought about this stuff before. And I guess I hadn't thought about any of this really before. I just knew Saturn was the answer. I didn't really know why until just the very second. Saturn is the only one that lives up to its billing because Saturn does not have Saturn has a very, very bland surface. The aerosols on Saturn mean that, unlike Jupiter, which is filled with these roiling clouds, bands of clouds and belts of clouds and incredible detail in the clouds, Saturn's pretty plain. It's kind of a yellow milkshake, and it's lighter than water. Saturn would float in water. And there's very, very indistinct bands, but the color's a lovely kind of a gold, and the rings are the way they're supposed to look. And there's not a lot of detail in the rings either. So if you look at a photograph taken by a 200-inch Palomar telescope, or even really one taken by the Cassini space probe in orbit around Saturn, Saturn looks like a kind of a vague golden ball surrounded by these crisp rings. And in the smallest telescope, exactly, even in the smallest telescope, you can see the rings and the body of Saturn, and it's everything you thought it would be, and it knocks you on your butt. It knocks you down. It's so cool. It's just fantastic. Now, unfortunately, it's the only thing that's really fantastic in a small telescope. This is the big disappointment of amateur astronomy, and this is where you separate a lot of the wheat from the chaff. So let's take a look at the rest of the planets, because we'll deal with the deep sky objects in a second. Mars in a small telescope, even at a relatively high power, is a distinguishable disk. You can see that it's a disk, but it's a small disk. And under ideal circumstances, in a 12-inch telescope, which is a good-sized telescope for an amateur, if you would stay out all night and wait for the sky to get really still, which was rare in Miami because, first of all, you're so low. I mean, the observatory is probably at 12 feet above sea level. So all the atmosphere is above you. If you got to 3,000 feet, you'd be above a third of the density of the atmosphere, so not above the third of the distance, but the heavy air is down low. So Mars, under ideal conditions with a decent-sized telescope, I have seen the polar caps on Mars, and I've seen major features like Syrtis Major, this giant kind of black triangle, but it's this big, and you can occasionally see, there's definitely a little white speck for the polar cap, and I kind of make out a little bit of a band here. So that's disappointing. Jupiter, under ideal conditions, you can definitely see bands of clouds. You can see that the disk is flattened, and the moons of Jupiter pop right out. Those babies are right there. You can see the shadows of the moons when they transit across Jupiter. You can see the red spot pretty clearly. But it's not... It's worse now, because when I saw Jupiter through a telescope, the best telescope in the world had a picture of Jupiter taken on a 60-inch telescope in the same atmosphere I was looking through. Even the best ground-based picture of telescope was nothing, really. I remember when Pioneer 10 got to Jupiter, and we saw the detail on the cloud banks. I was probably 14, I guess, with the rest of the grown-ups, and we're seeing these pictures come back, and I went, you gotta be kidding me. Jeez, look at the detail. Do you believe that? You'll never see that with a ground-based telescope. Couldn't see it with the Palomar telescope. Mercury is I've seen Mercury with my naked eye probably 3 times. I don't think I've ever seen Mercury through a telescope. Mercury is so close to the sun that it's almost always lost in the glare of the sun under ideal conditions. If you have a very clear eastern or western horizon, you can see Mercury, but I don't even know if you'd be able to see much of the crescent. It's a very small planet, very hard to see. Venus is terrific. Venus is completely bland. It's utterly white in a telescope. The only thing that's cool about Venus is it's big when it's close. It makes a decent size image. And the crescent is cool, seeing crescent Venus because it's inside the sun. So as it comes around inside our orbit, we can see the sunlit part of the crescent. Crescent Venus is nice for a moment or two, but it's not something you just stare at. But Saturn is. Uranus and Neptune, I've seen in telescopes. They're just a little itty-bitty, tiny little vague green BB and an even smaller, tinier little pale blue BB. That's about it. I'll save the big one for last. I won't. If I don't get it now, it'll be out of the way. When you start off in amateur astronomy, views of the moon are also as powerful as Saturn. The moon in a telescope will take your breath away because the craters are like, oh my God. As with Saturn, the moon lives up to its billing, I suppose. I should have mentioned it earlier, but the moon and astronomers have a very, very dysfunctional relationship. The moon, you really do need a moon filter. I used to look at the moon without a moon filter, and if you're out at nighttime, when you put that moon up to your eye and all that light's coming in, it'll blind you. I mean, it won't physically blind you, it won't hurt you, but it's bright. So they actually, when we bought that telescope, there's a little piece of glass called a moon filter, green filter that cut a lot of the light down. Had a glass sun filter too, which was at the focus, and that's actually very dangerous. If you're going to look at the sun, you want an aperture over the front of the telescope, not at the bottom where all the light is and heat is concentrated, because those things have been known to crack, and that's the end of that vision. But the moon will show you craters. A lot of people think the full moon is the way to look, but the full moon is the worst time to see the moon because the light on the full moon, definition of full moon is it's noon on the near side of the moon. So all the light is straight down. There's no shadows at all, and the moon is very washed out, and the rays from the craters, the white ejecta stands out, but the moon's not very interesting at full moon. But even a couple days on either side of full, you can start to see shadows. And first quarter moon is really cool. The black shadows really stand out, and you see the craters, and you zoom in there, and you see rills and mountains. That's pretty neat. But you get tired of it after a while. And the problem with the moon, of course, is that the moon blows everything else out of the water. If the moon is up, it's time to go home. As far as astronomy is concerned, the moon kills everything that's not a planet, which leads us to the other objects that you can see with a telescope. And I'll kind of come back and wrap this up for you if you'd like. The other objects we call deep sky objects, and they consist of basically two different things. There are nebulae and there are galaxies. For most of the history of astronomy, people thought they were the same thing. I did a post on my Facebook page not too long ago, just a couple days ago, showing what the Andromeda galaxy would look like if it was actually bright. It's many times the size of the full moon, many times. And it's spectacular to look at if you could only see it, but it's so faint. So deep sky objects are very, 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 very faint, and they break down into two different categories, as I said, nebulae and galaxies. Galaxies are island universes like our own Milky Way, and they're out a great distance on a pitch black night with a decent wide-angle telescope, low power telescope. I think I've seen a little bit of the structure of this gray-green oval. It's a gray-green oval. It's brighter in the middle. That's about all you get. I think on a dark night I might have seen a little bit of darkness in that gray mush, but it's nothing like what you see in time exposures. So those are galaxies, and Andromeda is far and away the most spectacular, and they're basically just little smudges. And frankly, in astronomy, just identifying it, oh, that little smudge there that I can't make anything out of, yep, that's M33. That's the triangle galaxy, I want to say. Yeah, okay, cool, all right. So that's galaxies. Now, the other things are nebulae, which is the same word as cloud, nebulous, or, it's a word for cloud. And they are virtually indistinguishable from galaxies in small telescopes. They're just little smudges of light, but they're very different. They live inside our own galaxy, inside our own Milky Way. They're not extragalactic like other galaxies are. And there are two different flavors of nebulae. There are basically, I want to say call them emission nebulae and planetary. I'm not sure about planetary nebulae. I forget what the other name might have been. Basically, nebulae are the birth stages and the death stages of stars before they become stars and then after they stop being stars. The Orion Nebula, the most famous by far, which is nice in a big telescope, but it's still just a gray-green smidge of light. You can see some detail, but it's not like, wow. You can definitely see detail. It's worth looking at, but you got to be dark. You can't do that in the city. You can't see it. It's so faint. But in a telescope, the Orion Nebula, you can see some of the shape and the structure, and it's definitely brighter in the middle, and the stars of the trapezium are in the middle, lighting it up. It's really pretty. It's nice. But it's not like what you would want it to be. There's no reds. There's no blues. You don't see any detail. There's no cloud structure. None of it's too faint. The Orion Nebula, the Trifid Nebula, the Lagoon Nebula, all of these nebulae are giant clouds of dust and gas from the corpses of previous stars, and they are coalescing over time to make new stars. They're star nurseries is what they are. It's where stars are made. And then occasionally you can find nebulae like the Crab Nebulae or others where after the star explodes, a supernova will blow a bubble of gas out, and it's called a planetary nebulae because that little bubble looks like a faint planet. And those are usually even less detailed than the other nebulae are. And they're fun to identify, but you can't really see much of them. Here's the thing that's so heartbreaking, and I hate to break this to people who are big fans of science fiction, but it's something we just all have to face. We don't have to like things, we just have to be true. When you look at the Andromeda Galaxy at nighttime, it's very dim. It's just barely visible as an oval. And likewise, you would think, well, gee, I guess when you got close to it, right? If you in science fiction things, if we were to get in a starship and fly to the Andromeda Galaxy, as we got closer, needless to say, it get brighter and brighter, and it would look exactly the way it was. We'd hang out there some distance away, and we'd look and we'd see all the details we see in these time exposures. Some of them are an hour. No. And the reason it wouldn't look any brighter, if you flew right into the middle of the Andromeda Galaxy, it would still be a ghastly, pale, gray-green ghost. The reason we know this to be true is because we happen to be living right smack in the middle of the second biggest galaxy in the local cluster, which is the Milky Way. And when you go out at nighttime and you look at the Milky Way, you don't see star lanes and you don't see all these pillars and you don't see all this cool stuff. It's just gray. The Milky Way is gray, and so is the Andromeda Galaxy, because the light is so diffuse that you cannot see that structure without long time exposures. So the sad thing is that if you ever saw the Starship Enterprise whipping on its way out to Andromeda, like it did in that one episode with the energy barrier, where no man has gone before, I guess, it wouldn't be there, and it wouldn't, as you got into it, you wouldn't get to see all the structure. It'd just be gray goo, just the way the Milky Way is. It's just sad, but it's true. You just have to live with it. Now you can start getting into amateur photography. I never particularly did, but there you go. So here's your answer for you, Jennifer. Saturn, the moon, they're striking. Jupiter often puts on a good show. Mars, on ideal conditions, when Mars is in opposition, when it's not on the other side of the solar system, when we're right in front of it, it can get pretty cool sometimes. But if you really want to blow people away, use Saturn. If Saturn isn't up, get a photograph of Saturn, make a slide out of it, tape it to the inside of the eyepiece, put a little light in there, and that will do it, because people will not believe how good Saturn looks. That was really fun. I could talk astronomy all day. Yeah, I think I'll do this. David R. DiNardo says, I really actually want to take this question. I've had variations on this for a while. I've heard John Denver died in a Long Easy crash. Someone close to me hates the idea of me wanting one. You've made me want to become a pilot and one day own a plane as cool as Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which is actually called the Hummin' Tiger now because we got the engine fixed, but nevertheless. Are Long Easies generally safe aircraft? They are, in many ways, the safest aircraft in the sky. And I want to talk about the John Denver crash, and I'll talk about the Long Easy. John Denver bought the aircraft from... I know the person who sold him the airplane, although I only knew him many, many years after the accident. The Long Easy is a plans-built aircraft. It was designed by Burt Rutan off of his Very Easy. The Very Easy was his second significant design. His first one was called a Very Viggen. So here's young Burt Rutan, just a kid, and he wants a fighter jet like everybody else. And because he's Burt Rutan and not Bill Whittle, for example, he doesn't spend years in the theater department wandering around and, complaining about things. He goes out and builds a design of his own called the Very Viggen, which was based loosely on the Saab Viggen fighter, kind of a delta wing vehicle, and he built it out of plywood. He just designed it and built it through a Volkswagen engine, I think, on the back, or half a Volkswagen engine, cut it in half, put that in there, and off he went. And it flew really well. If you've ever seen Death Race 2000, by the way, for you trivia fans out there, with the old movie with David Carradine, at the very end of that movie, there's this kind of, well, the movie shot in the 70s, so there's this futuristic airplane that's kind of following this road warrior guy across, and it's doing these right-angle banks and popping behind hills and up and down and flying almost inverted at 100 feet. That is a very big one, and it's piloted by Burt frickin' Rutan. So, the Very Big One is a plywood machine. Burt watched people making models. He came up with his moldless composites, made them very easy, and then almost very quickly, I think within a year or two, realized it needed more fuel, needed better wing attachment, and he made the Long Easy, which became the basis of the Bearcoot, which our friend James Redman has the best of show, best of breed model out there, and they're fantastic airplanes. So the point of the Long Easy is it's made from plans. You really do get just a giant series of blueprints. The genius of what Burt did was he realized that if you could get a block of foam, and they sell this stuff all over the place now, blue foam basically, and let's say you want to make the wing of a Long Easy. Well, a wing has to be a very precise plan form. Right? It has to be curvy on the top, has to be flat on the bottom, and for the wing to perform efficiently and effectively, that design actually changes. The wing root, the part of the wing that's close to the airplane is bigger. It gets smaller as it gets further out. I think most people probably realize that. And also, it changes its shape. The airfoil changes as it goes into it. You want the inside of the wing to stall before the outside of the wing, so you want to make the inside wing curvier. And the reason you want the inside of the wing to stall before the outside is because if the wing stalls on the inside, the ailerons, which are controlling the roll, are still flying, so that's the idea. It's called washout. Now, what Burt realized was that there's a template for the inside of the wing, the near part close to the fuselage, and then there's a series of different templates that change their shape as they get further and further outboard. And what he realized was, he said, if I cut just some life-size program, just gave you life-size blueprints of this, and you cut this out of the paper, literally cut it out with scissors, and put it on a block of wood or a piece of thin metal, and you made that block of wood or metal in the just basically sanded or cut it, or to the shape of this printed plan that I'm giving you, and you space these things 5 feet apart or whatever, right? Then what you could do is you could take a hot wire and you could stretch it between these two pieces of wood. And it's a very primitive looking thing. You literally just a couple of alligator clips and stick it on a rheostat, and this wire gets really hot. And if you put these plans that I gave you and cut them out and put them on wood or metal, and you put them on two ends of this block at a known distance, and you took this wire and you ran the wire over the foam, what would happen is that the wire would go through the foam like a hot knife through butter, but it wouldn't go through the metal templates of the airfoil. And if you did it smoothly and you move these wires over these two templates on either end, when you were done and you pulled the templates off, you'd have a piece of foam that would be precisely the airfoil you were looking for. Precisely the airfoil. Now, you've got the foam, which doesn't have any strength at all. You could basically just snap it in half. But if you now have the foam and the foam has the shape, the foam's got the shape, and you take a simple piece of bidirectional fiberglass, which I think is called a Rutan weave, a bid, bidirectional fiberglass, and you take fiberglass and you just basically mix up your epoxy and you slop it down over the foam, and you lay this piece of cloth over this foam, and you do a number of layups. You keep laying up more and more of this very strong cloth. The cloth will bear the loads. The cloth is strong enough. There's a spar that you build that goes through the middle as well. But the outside of the wing on a Long Easy is fiberglass, and the inside is essentially non-structural foam in terms of not taking any load, but it's giving you the shape, and it worked like a charm. Either Foghorn or James, if you're watching, I forget what the two. Burt said that. I think he said that a Long Easy is made. Is it made out of diapers and honey or tablecloths and honey? Something like that. I think basically what he's saying that a Long Easy is made out of the honey is the epoxy, which gets very hard and very strong, and it's just literally a piece of cloth. You just lay these things down, and it's incredibly strong. Incredibly strong, very, very great design. So, the thing about the Long Easy that's so remarkable, there's many, many remarkable things about the Long Easy, but the thing that's most remarkable about the canard design is the Long Easy doesn't look like other airplanes. It looks like it's flying backwards. Most airplanes have the engine in the front with a propeller. It's called a tractor propeller, and the propeller pulls the plane through the air. And the tail is where sticking out behind, the tail is where the elevators, which control your pitch, nose up and nose down, that controls your speed. The wings have ailerons to control the roll, and that's pretty much the same on the Long Easy as it is on a conventional airplane. But Bert decided to put the tail in the front and the engine in the back, just the way the Wright brothers did, strangely enough. The Wright brothers' first airplane that ever flew was a pusher canard, just like a Long Easy. Engines pushing in the back, a little wing up in the front called a canard, which was going to raise or lower the nose and tell the main wing what to do. So far, so good. There are many interesting things about this, though. Most people don't know this, but anything from a Cessna 172 to a Boeing 747, any traditionally configured airplane, the tail actually pushes down. There is aerodynamic loads on the airplane pushing the airplane down. If you want to make something fly and you've got to lift a large amount of weight, you would want all of your aerodynamic forces going up, wouldn't you? But in every traditional airplane, you have to put enough power and enough lift in there to overcome the fact that the tail is pushing down. It's actually generating an aerodynamic force that pushes down. I don't know when I learned that. I was a flight student in 91. I thought I knew a lot about airplanes, but I didn't realize that until I actually started learning napkins and honey. Thank you, Foghorn. The reason it pushes down is because if the tail's in the back, think about this for a second. But if the tail is constructed in such a way that the force of the load is down, then what happens? Well, in straight and level flight, the plane is straight and level. That's why we call it straight and level flight. You got a certain power setting, your elevators are set, and you're just flying along at 100 knots or 500 knots or whatever, right? Everything's copacetic. Now, if all of a sudden you were to go faster, right? What happens? Well, as you go faster, the aerodynamic load on the tail gets stronger, and it pushes the tail down, which is what it's designed to do. Pushing the tail down makes the nose go up, and making the nose go up slows the airplane down. So it's a feedback mechanism. It means that the airplane doesn't get into runaway airspeed dives. If the nose of the airplane goes down for whatever reason, the pilot falls asleep or whatever, the plane starts going faster and faster and faster. And if this design wasn't built into it, the plane would just accelerate. It wouldn't even have time to crash. It would break up in the air as it got so fast it would exceed the aerodynamic loads on the structure, come apart. But with this conventional design, on any airplane from a 747 to a Cessna 150, if somebody falls asleep at the wheel and the plane starts going down, it starts moving faster. As it moves faster, the aerodynamic loads on the tail increase, and they push down harder on the tail. And since the tail's behind the center of gravity, as the plane goes faster and faster and faster, the nose starts to come up. And that automatically saves you from coming to pieces. And the reverse works as well. If it turns out that you're in a stall where you're going slower and slower and slower, the nose is coming up and you're going slower and slower and slower, the load on the tail gets less and less and less because you're moving slower through the air. That means the tail comes up. The tail coming up means the nose goes down. And these things tend to stabilize the airplane in flight. It makes an airplane fun to fly instead of a death trap like the Spirit of St. Louis or in many configurations the Voyager. But Bert realized that if you put the wing up front, the tail up front, you could do the same thing. You could control the pitch of the airplane with the little wing up front called a canard, and as you went faster, that would generate more lift, which would raise the nose, which is what you want. And if you got in a dive, it would generate more lift and raise the nose. Likewise, if you're going too slow, it would put the nose down. So the first advantage of the Long Easy design is pretty simple. Everything's going up. Nothing's pushing down, so they're a lot more efficient. But there's a much, 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 much better reason for the canard, and it's much, much safer. A large percentage of fatal accidents in general aviation are caused by aerodynamic stall. Now, a stall is not the same as when the engine stalls. I had an engine stall, but it didn't have an aerodynamic stall. We'll go up and practice aerodynamic stalls and not have an engine stall. So what happens in a stall is this. A wing is basically works as an airfoil because when the leading edge of the wing hits air, the air has to make a decision. Some of the air goes over the top, some of the air goes under the bottom. The bottom of the wing is flat, the top of the wing is curved. The air that has to go over the top of the wing has to travel more distance because it has to go around side the arc, while the circumference, while the air that goes on the bottom of the wing in a straight line just travels the radius. So since the air on the top has to go further, it's accelerating. It's got to get to the back at the same time because air pressure is pushing it. All the air wants to be in the same place all the time. That's why a plane flies. All the air wants to be in the same place at the same time. So the air over the top of the wing has to accelerate to get to the back of the wing faster. And as it accelerates, it becomes less dense. There's fewer air molecules. That means it's lower pressure. The pressure on the bottom of the wing is higher than the pressure on the top of the wing, and the lift goes up. And that is non-mechanical to the degree that you don't need an engine for it. If you're moving that airfoil through the air, you will generate lift. Hooray. The problem is that it's nonlinear. In other words, if you're flying at 60 knots or 100 knots, you get a certain amount of lift, and you come down to 80 knots, you get less lift. You get to 60 knots, you get less lift. You get to 40 knots, you get less lift. But when you get to 20 knots, you get no lift, because somewhere around on my little on my other airplane, the Sky Arrow, right at 40 knots, which is practically walking speed. It's very slow for an airplane. It depends on the wing and the load and everything else, but there comes a point where instead of it just continuing to make less and less lift, it comes to a point when the wing is moving so slowly that the air basically says, you know what, screw it, we're out of here. And it stops conforming to the top of the wing. It just breaks off. The wing just stops working. And that's called a stall. And once the wing is stalled, it's not a wing anymore. And if you don't have a wing anymore, it's not an airplane anymore. It's just 1,200 pounds of aluminum and steel, and it's coming down like any other piece of aluminum and steel. So aerodynamic stall, when the wing stalls, is what gets people into trouble. If they stall on a base to final turn where they're 300-400 feet, the plane stops flying, and normal recovery, you put the nose down and you gain your speed back and your angle of attack. It's not just speed. I'm not going to get into that right now. But basically it's speed for all intents and purposes. You get enough speed back over the wing, and then the wing starts flying again, but it takes 700-800 feet in some cases to do that. And if you're 300 feet above the ground, then you're not going to have a good time. So people get killed on low-level stalls into the ground when people lose their engine, which has happened to me 3 times. The natural instinct when you feel the plane when you want the plane to climb and you want to go up, when the engine goes out, the natural inkling is to pull back. That slows the airplane down very quickly because you don't have a power plant anymore. And if that happens and that wing starts going too slow, it's not a wing, it's not an airplane, and in you go, and they read about you in the newspapers. So the reason I think I've dealt with 3 engine failures so effectively was because I learned in gliders I didn't have an engine in gliders. When the tow rope broke, engines hardly ever fail. I'm very unfortunate in that regard, but ropes break frequently. So on a rope break, nose down, nose down, nose down, nose down, nose down, nose down, instantly. Power gun, nose down. Now you're in a glider. You can glide and you can land, and there's not a civil aviation airplane that if you land at minimum airspeed under control, you're almost certainly going to walk away from that. Cessnas land at 60 knots, and mine landed at 40. Break your feet or something like that. People die because the plane goes into the ground at a very steep angle. If you land flat at a low energy rate at 40 knots, you're carrying a certain amount of energy. At 80 knots, you're not carrying twice as much energy, you're carrying 4 times as much energy, as square. So if you land level and at slow speeds, your chances of surviving are very good, even if you go into terrible terrain. So the stall, it's the stall that kills you, the aerodynamic stall. And traditional airplanes, when they would stall, they would often break and fall down on a side. And if you're not careful, you can get into a spin, and a spin is a case, you can't have a spin unless both wings are stalled. And then to recover from a spin is actually pretty straightforward, but I'm here to tell you I've done spins, I've done a number of spins, and the first time you go into a spin, you are scared out of your wits because you kind of think you're kind of level, but I mean a spin, you are looking down at the ground and you are just woo, woo, woo. It gets your attention. It gets your attention in a big way. It's like, that's why we train. Okay, so I'm in a spin, neutral aileron, stick forward, opposite rudder, and just wait. If you try to do what you want instinctively to do, which is aileron your way, roll your way out of a stall, you'll keep in the stall until you hit the ground. Neutral elevators, nose down, opposite rudder, let the rudder do its job, and you'll come out of the stall. But you can't do that at low altitude. So anyway, blah, 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 blah. Traditional airplanes stall because the main wing loses its lift and it drops. And then you either get out of it or you don't, but if it happens at low level, you don't have the altitude to get out of it. Now, Rutan realized, I didn't mean to say Rutan, I meant to say my buddy Bert, realized that if you set the angle of the forward wing, I'm not talking about the angle of the elevators, I mean the angle at which it's bolted to the airframe. If that little forward wing, which is generating lift, unlike the tail, which is not generating lift, it's generating anti-lift, if you set the forward wing to generate lift and you set the angle of the forward wing at a higher angle than the main wing, that meant that almost under any conditions, no matter what you did to the airplane, no matter what kind of crazy pull-up you did, no matter how slow you flew, if you put the nose up to the point where in a traditional airplane the main wing would stall and down it would go, Bert realized that if he sets the canard at a certain angle, since the canard is controlling the pitch, it's controlling the up and down position of the nose, he realized, if I set that at a higher angle, as that nose comes up, that forward wing is going to stall before the main wing, which is carrying most of the load of the airplane, stalls, which means that if the canard stalls first, the second the canard loses lift, the nose is going to drop. And if the nose drops, then the main wing is going to keep flying. You cannot stall a canard airplane. I mean, people have made a major effort to, but if that airplane is properly loaded within its published legal weights and balances, it is impossible to stall a canard. You can pull a canard through a turn, a low-level turn, an insane maneuver. You could do it at 300 feet above the ground in a 60-degree bank, turning to final, haul back on that stick, which would be a death sentence in anything else. And in a canard, as that canard starts working harder and harder and harder and harder and harder, finally the canard's going to run out of authority, the canard's going to stall, but the main wing, which is carrying most of you, is going to keep on flying. And when that canard stalls in the turn, the nose is going to drop, and it's going to reduce your turn angle, and you're just fly the way right out of there. It's a fantastic airplane. It's virtually impossible to stall a canard. Virtually impossible. And as B.D. Cates says, Bill will eventually get to the point of the John Denver crash. I had to make the case for the Long Easy before I talk about John Denver, because you have to understand that the aerodynamics of the Long Easy make a canard-driven Long Easy, in my opinion, a well-built canard where there's no manufacturing products, because it's not made by a factory. It's made by an individual. It has to pass an inspection, but if the guy built it well, it's terrific. If he didn't build it well, you might have problems. But the design is, in fact, the safest design in the sky. I think it's the safest design ever made. It's virtually impossible. And they're so clean, and since everything's lifting and they're so sleek, they'll glide forever. You lose an engine in a Long Easy, you probably have a 20-to-1 glide ratio, and a Cessna, it's probably 12-to-1 or less. So you can go further. You can have more options. Get to a nice field or an airport or something like that. So it's a very, very safe airplane. So what happened to John Denver, and why did John Denver end up getting killed in one of the safest airplanes out there? Well, this is a tragedy. It's a genuine tragedy. There's a couple of genuine tragedies. There's any number of accidents, but there are a number of tragedies. 2 or 3 I can think of. The loss of Spaceship Two was an actual tragedy because of the reason how it happened. I've gotten that before. I'm not going to get into it now. But I'll tell you about 2 tragedies in canards. John Denver's one of them. I loved his music. And not only did I love his music, I thought he was a great guy. He seemed to be a relatively humble guy, didn't seem to be much affected by all this. He was a superb pilot, great glider pilot, and biplane pilot, a great, great guy, and I loved his music. So John Denver went looking for a Long Easy to buy. Now, the Long Easies are made from plans, and the plans for the frame and the wings and everything, all that's pretty much standard, landing gear, all the rest. But what you do with the airplane once you've got the shell is entirely up to you. The way you want to wire it, the kind of instruments you want to put into it, or not put into it, pretty much open. The plans are plans, right? The plans say, do this way. But since you are the builder, and you are therefore essentially the designer, the experimental aviation laws say that if you build more than 50% of the airplane, it's your airplane, it's your design. So technically, I don't really own a Long Easy. I own a Don Burton Long Easy. What happened was John went looking for a plane, and there is a limited market of these planes, and my friend who basically brokered the deal said, this is a really nice airplane, John. It's a very nice airplane, and I think it'll suit you well, but this particular single airplane, this one Long Easy out of a fleet of 800 or something, just one has a really weird modification that the builder put in there, and I think you ought to get it changed back to the way it's supposed to be on the plans before you fly this. And John said, well, what's the modification? Well, the modification is this. In the Long Easy, the fuel selector, because there's a left wing tank and a right wing tank, it used to be left tank, right tank. I've got left, right, and both. I usually fly out of both. I'm taking fuel out of both tanks. But that fuel selector is right between your knees. It's right between your knees, right there where you can get to it, where you can see it, where it's part of your consciousness and so on. Which means that since that's where the fuel is being selected, left tank or right tank, that means the fuel has to flow from behind the pilot where it's stored in the wings and flow up into the front of the cabin between your legs there where you can get to the switch and select which one's being driven, and then it goes back to the engine. And the one guy out of 900 guys or finished Long Easies decided, I don't like the fuel right there between my legs. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the fuel in the back of the airplane behind the firewall. And so I'm going to put a fuel selector switch, maybe I think it was behind the firewall, but what I do know for a certain fact was instead of the fuel selector switch, left tank, right tank, off, right between your knees where you're aware of it and where you can reach it, he decided to mount it on a bulkhead right behind the pilot's left shoulder, I want to say. I'm pretty sure it was his left shoulder, right here. Now, the guy built the airplane, and he knew the airplane, so he just got used to it. He'd reach up, and he'd flip the fuel over here and there, that kind of thing like that, right? So these are how fatalities happen in 99 cases out of 100. It's not just one mistake or two mistakes or three mistakes. It's usually 4 or 5 things in succession. And if any one of these things had not happened, it would have broken the causality chain, and we'd be listening to John Denver today. Maybe we're listening to John Denver tell us what a swell guy Obama was, for all we know. So here's what happened. So John took a look at the airplane. He says, beautiful airplane, I love it, I'll take it. And I'll buy it, and we'll take it back to my hangar, and we'll do the modification. We'll get it back the way it should be. Hooray. But I can tell you how this works. You get a new airplane, you want to fly your new airplane. I can attest to this with a great deal of personal recent experience. So John decided, took the plane, possession of the plane, took it, I think it was back to his home field, I'm not sure. It was not far from here. It was out by Lompoc area, I want to say. And he decided to go for a little afternoon flight, at which point he handed over to my friend who would start to do the modifications, get the fuel selector back right. So John took off just for a quick sunset flight, which I've done many times. A quick flight, at the end of the day, it's getting cool finally, and go out there and just putz around the pattern for 40 minutes and so on. But see, I never fly with less than, I will not do a pattern. I will not do one pattern in the local airport without 45 minutes of fuel on board. I won't. I don't need to. It's just I don't need to worry about it, because if you run out of fuel on the ground, you pull over. You run out of fuel in the air, you got a different kind of problem. So John took off with, I think they said maybe 2-3 gallons, which was probably maybe 20-30 minutes of fuel, and I think all of it was pretty much in one tank. So he's brand new to the airplane. He's a very capable pilot. It's not a question of can he fly the airplanes, but he's new to the systems in the airplane, and no two of them are the same. My airplane is different than James's, which is different than Mike Melville's, which is different than Dick Rutan's. They're all different. They're all unique. So John Denver takes off with essentially very little fuel, flies out over the ocean, and the next thing you know, there's a splash in the ocean, and they go to retrieve the body, and there's nothing left but ripped up pieces of fiberglass and an engine on the bottom of the ocean. So what happened? Well, as I said, a number of things had to happen, and they all had to happen in the right order, and they all had to happen in a certain way, otherwise he'd be home. What happened, I think, what we generally think happened was he was out over the ocean. He took off with very little fuel. That was a fatal mistake, putting the airplane aside. It's a fatal mistake. But he knew he had enough fuel, you see. He wouldn't just go out with no fuel. He didn't have enough fuel. But what happened was he was at low level out of the ocean having a fine time in his wonderful, fun little rocket ship, and the engine started to sputter. And he realized it was sputtering because the tank that he had selected was out of fuel, but there was fuel in the other tank. So what he has to do is he has to switch from the left to the right or the right to the left. I do not know which one it was, but he was fuel starvation because one tank was empty. He knew he had 4 or 5 gallons or whatever left, and it was in the other tank. Now, if it had been me, I would just reach down. I fly with both tanks, but if it had been standard long easy, just reach down, flip the tank right there. Instantly, the fuel goes right to the end and boom, fires right up again, and off you go. But John had to do this. He had to come back here and flip this thing, and he wasn't familiar with the positions of the indents. And what they found in the after accident report, when they took a test pilot up in a long easy, they took a fuel selector thing, a dummy valve. It didn't work, but they put it up there and made it feel like the valve. And they had a number of test pilots go up to a much higher altitude and say, okay, now reach over and switch the tanks. And what every single one of them found is just natural human nature. You can't, I don't think you could do it. You could do it if you were prepared not to do it. But basically, you're sitting in a very confined space like this, and you've got your stick down here and your throttle down here, and you've got your feet on the rudder pedals, which are way ahead of you there. That's how you fly in any airplane. Now, they found time and time and time again, no matter how many times they tried to do it, that when you turned to look at this thing, and when you turned to switch it to see what was going on, you would push down with your right foot to get the leverage for the turn. You'd push that right foot down. It's almost impossible not to do it. When you turn out of I'm in a rotating chair now. If I were to get out of this chair, I'd push with my right foot to turn the thing to the left, and I'd get up, wouldn't think twice about it. Well, what happened was when he pushed down on that right turn with that right foot and deflected the full right rudder, and the situation with the low airspeed, it basically it rolled the airplane. And it rolled him inverted. And it rolled him inverted at low altitude, and he went into the water, and that was the end of that. So the John Denver accident was not only not due to the long easy, because the long easy says put your fuel selector between your knees. And if that builder had put that fuel selector where it was supposed to be, look, let me just say this. That builder is building an airplane for himself. It's experimental aviation. If he wants to put the fuel selector in a kite that follows behind him. That's his business. It's his business. But he deviated from the plans, and that deviation from the plans cost John Denver his life. So to the degree that he bought the one airplane that had the one out of the entire fleet that had that modification, that was bad choice. He didn't get it fixed before he went, but none of that was fatal. The fuel selector wasn't fatal. The previous owner had flown it for probably hundreds of hours, didn't kill him. And it wouldn't have killed John Denver either if he'd had enough fuel in his airplane and had a little time in the airplane and done the fuel tank selection switch a few times just to get the use of it. It was one of those situations, like virtually every other accident in general aviation, where a string of unfortunate things happen in a certain order, right on top of each other, and if any one of them hadn't happened, then the accident wouldn't have happened. But they did, and it did, and it's just terrible. And to this day, the Long Easy is tainted with that accident, and it didn't deserve it. And John, see, if you really had to come down with blame, and the only reason you come down with blame, and we're not children in this line of work, we do have to come down with blame. We don't come down with blame so we can beat up the pilot or certainly beat up the dead pilot or his family. We want to come down with blame because we don't want to have it happen again. I don't want to have it happen to me. So if somebody gets killed doing something in an airplane, I have a vested interest in finding out what he did so that I don't have to have that happen to me. I'm not going to live long enough to learn all these things. I have to learn from other people not living long enough to learn these things. So where's the blame lie? Well, it was a bad modification. Didn't really save anything. Nobody's ever been saved from a fire because of that modification, so it didn't get you anything. But just the modification alone didn't do it. I think if you had to put the blame anywhere, it would be on John Denver going for a joyride with very little fuel in an airplane he'd really essentially never flown before. That's crazy to me. I mean, they said when I first flew my Long Easy, they said, don't overload it on fuel, keep it light. And I said, okay, well, what do you need? I don't know, 4 or 5 gallons on a side, something like that. Just for pattern work, I certainly didn't go with less than 7 or 8. I mean, I just don't want to run out of fuel on an airplane. So that's the story of the John Denver Long Easy. David, I'll tell you something. I have enormous confidence in that design. I have enormous confidence in the designer. I have an enormous confidence in the person that built my airplane, and I have an enormous deal of confidence in the design and the strength of the airplane I fly. And the reason I say all that is because while the Cessna 172 and all of these certified Pipers and everything else are extraordinarily good airplanes, there's nothing wrong with them, they are very expensive, and you don't get a whole lot of performance. When you look at what you get for what you spend, the Long Easy is without question the best buy in aviation, and I believe it is an incredibly safe and fun airplane to fly. It's virtually impossible to get yourself killed in it. That's what they said about the Piper Cub, by the way. The Piper Cub is generally acknowledged to be the most friendly, safe, simple airplane in the sky, and instructors in the Piper Cub would say, son, you're about to get into a Piper Cub. It is the friendliest, safest airplane in the sky. It can just barely kill you. And that's it. Just barely kill you. So, anyway, yeah, I'm very sorry about that. And he deserved better, and the plane deserved better. But we're human beings, and we make mistakes. We want to go flying, so we go flying. As always, it's the psychological factors, right? I talked about that in that crash in the Mojave Firewall about Spaceship Two. The demons up there are not Mach Tuck or aerodynamic flutter. The demons are our psychology. The demons are built into the fact that we are not designed to be going through the air at 200 miles an hour or 80 or at all. We're not designed to be going through the air at all. We're designed to roam the plains and throw spears at things. And we can do it at all is a miracle, but we take our psychology with us up there, get there-itis. You've made plans to be at a destination, and you can often get your way out of that in terms like, well, here I am ready to go, but the conditions are crud. I guess I better stay. Some pilots have the moral courage to do that, but when you've got a girlfriend or a girlfriend and her girlfriend and that girl's boyfriend, and they're all waiting for you, and he has to be at work that morning, or else he's going to get fired, and conditions are spotty but likely clear along the route, and we can always just go and check, and you start asking yourself all these questions, start justifying all this. Then you get into an airplane, you fly out across the sound, and you're out over the open water on your way up to a relative's big wedding that you promised everybody you'd be there for, and you're one of the most famous people in the world, and you have had some instrument training, but you don't have an instrument rating, and conditions turn to zero visibility, and the next thing you know, you feel like you're in a right climbing turn, but you're actually in a left descending spiral, and you find that being the son of John Kennedy doesn't do you any good at all. You just stop trusting the instruments the way you're trained to be, and if you'd finished your training, you wouldn't have been in that trouble. You just feel like you're in a left turn or whatever, and so you pull up to get out of the turn, and you pull yourself into a tighter turn. Next thing you know, you and two other people are killed. And that's not the other tragedy I was going to talk about, by the way. The other tragedy I want to talk about just very briefly is just a horrible thing. It's just to show you the psychological traps. There's a guy out there, I never met him, it was way before I got into experimental aviation, but everybody who knew him seemed to love him. His name was Steve Drybread, and he was a guy who did many things. He designed the retractable landing gear for the Velocity, which I flew for 80 hours, and also did a full retract version for the Long Easy. And Steve Drybread was one of the great canard guys. He knew everything about that airplane. He knew an awful lot about the Berkut, and he was a terrific guy. And like I said, never met him, but I never heard a bad word spoken about him. So Steve Drybread was working on his plane one day on his canard. And the canard, the little wing up in the front, is attached to the airframe through two relatively, you'd be quite surprised at how, I don't want to say flimsy those bolts are, but they're not huge bolts. You think they'd have to be like bolts the thickness of your finger, but there's a couple bolts that hold the canard on that pitch the nose up and down, and those bolts are important because the canard needs to stay on the airplane. And then there's a cosmetic cover that goes over that that's not doing any real work at all on the Berkut. I think it was a Berkut. I'm not sure. James will probably know. But the canard is bolted on to the actual bulkhead with these bolts that run down underneath, and then there are a couple of screws that hold just the cosmetic cover over it so that rain doesn't get in there, and so it looks cool. So Steve Drybread was working on his airplane, and he took the canard off to do the work. This happens all the time, and like a conscientious person that he was, he put the bolts on his seat so that he could not sit in the airplane and fly off without those bolts being in place. I don't know the full details of this, but I do know what happened. So something happens. He gets called away. I don't know if it was a phone call or something, and somebody else, I think, this is what I heard, some second party saw the bolts there on the seat or something. They got moved and put them someplace else. So the canard was in place, but it wasn't bolted on. So Steve comes back, and he assumes that it's bolted on, and he puts the sets of screws that cover just the cosmetic cover over the top of the canard and goes out to fly. Now, if that hadn't had the cosmetic cover there, the second he pulled up on the stick to rotate, the canard would have just flown off the airplane, and he'd still be on the runway, and he probably would have skidded off, and it might have been bad, but it would very likely have been survivable. But unfortunately for Steve, the screws that were holding the cosmetic cover on provided enough strength for enough time to, even though the canard was not bolted on, kept the canard in place enough to lift the nose for him to start to climb out. And as he was climbing out and did a turn, I put enough load on that, which wasn't much load at all. And the screws, which were just holding the cosmetic cover on the canard, departed the airplane. The canard departed the airplane, and Steve Drybread went into the ground and was killed. The thing that's so tragic about that, as I said, there's lots of accidents, very few tragedies, is that on some level, you're looking at a guy who was so incredibly capable, so well versed in the Long Easy and the Berkut, and who was so conscientious and careful. He was not doing what John Denver did, running out with a little bit of fuel. He's a very careful guy. Put the bolts right on the seats where they're supposed to be. And he went up and got killed because he made an oversight and some second party got in there. That was the chain of causality. If somebody hadn't moved those bolts, then Steve would have decided, hey, I'm going to go flying, and he would have put the covers on, and he would have, sat there and done everything he would have done that ended up getting him killed. But when he got in the airplane to go flying, he would have had to sit on the bolts and went, oh my God, I wouldn't do it. It's horrible. But somebody moved him, so that wasn't there to save him. So we learn from these things, and we have to. You have to learn from these things. I think a flight instructor told me this late. It wasn't my primary flight instructor. And really, I've been told a lot of great things in aviation. This wasn't one that I really thought was particularly good. But he basically said, here's how it works here, kid. When you start flying, you have two giant sacks. One is full of luck and the other's full of experience. When you start flying, you got a big bag full of luck and nothing in the experience bag, and your entire flight career is going to be to see if you can transfer enough luck into the experience bag so that you've always got something to put on the job. Because if you run out of luck before you gain enough experience, you're going to die up there. And it's exactly right. I've done a couple things that were stupid, but I haven't done 5 stupid things in a row. Maybe I've done 2 stupid things in a row, but not 3 or 4. And just pre-flighting your airplane thoroughly is one of them. So, as a result of this, I now, as part of my pre-flight, I check the bolts on the elevator. I check to make sure that when the elevator on the canard, when I move the elevator, that all the bolts are where they're doing and they're not rotating. And then before I move on, I grab the canard with both hands and I go like that. I mean hard, really hard. And the whole airplane goes because that means the bolts are attached. And so Steve Drybread is saving some lives, I hope. Anyway, that's about that. Do another little bit, I guess. I'm having a good time. We're not going to get to do all of these. Let me just have a quick look here. All right, we'll definitely take this one. 2 questions that I kind of sort of lobbed together because I think they're kind of interesting. Trey Lyles or Leals says, would you rather live in a zombie apocalypse or a socialist utopia, and why? I'd rather live in the zombie apocalypse because then all you have to do is fight the zombies. If you live in the socialist utopia, you have to fight everybody. Everybody's your enemy in the socialist utopia. The entire society is designed for you to not succeed and for you not to excel, and everything's built upon it. And if you start to show any kind of initiative or anything that I consider to be a primary value, if you show courage, if you show innovation, intelligence, risk-taking, you're punished for it. In a zombie apocalypse, you're rewarded handsomely for all of these things with your lives. So for my given value set, I'd rather live in the zombie apocalypse than in the socialist utopia because I think everybody who lives in the socialist utopia is a zombie. I think the worst thing that can happen in the zombie apocalypse is you become a zombie, right? I mean, those are your choices. You either kill zombies or you become one. And one bites you and you become a zombie. And what is a zombie? A zombie is a mindless drone. It's a unit. It has no goals, no aspirations, no independence, nothing. It staggers around and it eats things. That's it. It lives a life of uniformity and hopelessness and inhumanity. It's like a shark. It's like a great white shark. A zombie is a great white shark. It just moves through the environment, and its entire purpose is to eat brains, and that's all it does. Zombies don't have plans and dreams. There's no zombie dream where you have a nice little patch of a graveyard someplace, and you and your zombie family can set up a hearse and do a little tailgating at the Raiders game. Nope, you're just a zombie. You're a unit. You process food over the course of your lifetime, and then you die. And in a socialist country, you get that. You certainly got in the Soviet Union. If you showed any initiative, if you showed any kind of resentment, forget rebellion, just resentment, pretty soon the KGB or the MKVD or whoever was assigned to this, because it's what they do, would find out about it. You'd be denounced by your brother-in-law, or maybe your girlfriend get mad at you, and you'd say you mentioned something bad about dear leader, and you're taken away and you're shot. And you live in fear all the time, and you have no place to go, right? That's really it. There's no place where you're safe in a socialist utopia. The fear that ran through the Soviet Union and through China and through Nazi Germany, just the fear, the constant fear. You can't have that kind of a powerful state without fear, because people won't do socialism without fear. Now, you may say that Sweden doesn't count. Well, let's take Sweden again. Sweden is driven by a kind of fear. I mean, Sweden, if you take Sweden as the example of good socialism, it's driven by the fact that I don't want to worry about my rent, I don't want to worry about my health care, I don't want to worry about anything, and I'll give up all of my hopes and dreams in exchange for being taken care of. It's fear. It's fear of your own authorship. It's fear of responsibility. It's fear of freedom. Eric Fromm talked about this, escape from freedom. Most people don't want to be free. They want to be taken care of. And they think that it's a worthy trade. And I know many Americans who feel that way. It's a worthy trade. I'd rather be taken care of than be the author of my own destiny. You mean healthcare be free? Yep. And you'll I don't have to pay for the doctor? Nope. And what about apartments? Nope, we'll take care of that for you too. What about my food bill? Nope, we'll supply you with a EBT card. What about transportation? We'll get you a bus and an Obama phone, all of that. It's all going to suck. It's going to be low quality food, low quality transportation, low quality health care. It's all going to suck, but you'll get it for free. You don't have to worry. We'll take care of it for you. We'll take care of it. Just go to work and vote for us. Okay, a lot of people make that deal because some people aren't wired for freedom. They don't have the courage for it. Freedom requires courage. And not just the courage to defend freedom. I mean, everyday operation of being a free person requires courage. You know, in the Soviet Union, before the Soviet Union fell, a lot of Russian emigres would beg, plead, borrow, and steal, pay huge sums of money, and come over here to America in the 80s and 90s. And you had a large number of them going home because they realized, I have to pay my rent? Yes. You mean you have to get a job? Yes. Well, what happens if I don't pay your rent? Well, you get evicted. Well, then what happens? Well, then you live in the street, man. You got to get a job. What? I went to a job and they made me want to work. Yeah, well, you have to work. That's the deal. A lot of Soviets couldn't take it. They went back home. So it depends on your value system. I know a lot of people think it's nuts. They really think you're barking mad. You'd really, really, really rather live in a zombie apocalypse than in socialist paradise? I would. Because you're an author of your own destiny. And furthermore, my experience over the weekend a couple weeks ago rather, in Tampa, is also important. You know, what is life really? I mean, life is more than eating, right? It's more than eating and sleeping. It's more than free healthcare. Life is about relationships. It's about people. It's about things that you do. It's about achievements. It's what makes it your life and not somebody else's life. The whole purpose of collectivism is to make sure everybody has the same life. And they'll openly say it. We want you to have the same house. We want you to have the same this. We want you to have the same everything. It's like everything's going to be the same. So everybody leads the same life. It's Winston Smith, right? It's Winston Smith and Ingsoc. He's an indescribable, ununique, faceless cog. Or you look at the guy in Brazil. Any of these these dystopias. You're not a person. You're a unit. And the thing that 1984 has in common with Brazil and has in common with the real world of these socialist things is that you have friends maybe, but there's nobody you seem to really trust. You don't really trust people with your lives because nobody wants to take that kind of risk. We already know what kind of person you are because you're living under this system. Haven't hung out with a bunch of fighter pilots down there who took me under a wing that they certainly had no obligation to. And basically we went out and, well, we did risk our lives. We were flying airplanes in interesting conditions. It's like, I trust these guys. And trusting people and depending on people who you admire is a tremendously exhilarating experience. And so the best part of a zombie apocalypse would be you and 7 other people or whatever the number is. But even though you may have all come from completely different backgrounds, you may have completely different values, when it's you versus the zombies, you either count on them and they're either worth being your friends or you ditch them because they're either going to save your life and you're going to save theirs or they're not. And that kind of quality is what makes life worth living to me. I don't see life as a clock I need to run out without getting as undamaged or as, hungry as possible. I want to do things. And if do things means, defend myself and fight with people I admire, take risks for things I care about, I'd rather live that way. Which I bundled with a question which may not sound similar, but I think it is. And boy, here we go. This is one of these cases where we just wade into things without any political correctness here. Charles Staley asks, is liberalism inherently feminine? I think it is inherently feminine. And here's where the minefield is. You look at Nazi Germany, and you will see in Nazi Germany what kind of hell the world can be when it is completely masculine, when all masculine virtues are applauded and any feminine, traditional feminine quality. I'm just going to say traditional so we know what we're talking about. I don't really need to do that because we know what masculine and feminine means, but we're talking about these traditional masculine and feminine virtues. You want to see hell on earth, then look at Nazi Germany and see what happens when masculinity runs rampant without being tempered by any femininity or any softness or any mercy or any forgiveness. This social Darwinian kind of, we're going to exterminate the Jews for our racial purity, and we're gonna euthanize the mentally ill for our racial purity. We're gonna kill or starve or murder 30 million Russians so that we have the Lebensraum, the living space for our master race, so that we can rule the world and be the Herren folk that we're supposed to be. And it's just nothing but brutality, nothing but rage and aggression and all this other stuff. However, you do get the male qualities. You get efficiency, you get order, you get a lot of courage, you get tremendous innovation, tremendous engineering, and many lovely things. So that's what happens when you live in a hell that is overly masculine. I think we are really rapidly and accelerating into a world which is the exact opposite of that, where our society is becoming so feminine that it is becoming a different kind of a dystopia. If you'd ask me if I'd rather live in a world governed by Code Pink or the SS, I'll take Code Pink. So there's no confusion about that. But when emotionality and feelings become as dominant as they were absent in a place like Nazi Germany, then bad things start to happen. When how we feel about an answer determines whether an answer is true or not, we lose the ability to do everything that has made this kind of feminine society possible. You can't have a society this feminine unless the masculine qualities that got you there were well in shape. You can't have this kind of feminine liberalism in a world that is under siege by hostile tribes of men. You just don't, it won't survive. It won't be tolerated. When there's a wolf at the door, you need big, strong men as a general rule to go out and take care of the wolves. Now, somebody asked a question which I didn't take about the Rangers. I don't know the details about these two women that passed Ranger School, but I did read an article from a guy who was in that class who said, we not only did not give it to these women, we did not lower the standards for them. These two women actually had to do harder work than we did. If that is true, then they deserve their Ranger tab, and God bless them for it. I want to be crystal clear on this. If they, and it appears that they did, if they were able to meet the same standards as the men in that unit, then I think they've earned it. But when you get into this kind of Code Pink feminism and this kind of liberalism and this kind of soft, feely kind of thing, where if we would just get boys to stop playing with sticks, then we wouldn't have any war or rape anymore, then you've lost your mind. As I've said 100 times here, there's only one society that is balanced and decent and provides a Disneyland and the kind of world that we all grew up in. And that's a world where men are not feminized into being weaklings and neurotic crybabies, but rather are taught how to use the violence that is in their system. It's in the testosterone. The violence and the aggression is in human men. And the reason it's in human men and the reason it's not going to go away is because it is in male apes, and it is in male chimps, it is in male monkeys, it's in male fish, it's in male lions, it's in male donkeys, it's in male everything, and it is there to keep the species alive and healthy and at optimum tune. You cannot eliminate maleness from the human population because you can't eliminate it from any of the other population. You can't take, if you were to take the lions out of Africa, the male lions out of Africa, pretty soon you would run out of lions, not just because they couldn't reproduce, but because they serve a function. They preserve a function of strength of the species and so on. Now, in a thinking society with values and morals, that's only one answer. What you're left with is you have to understand that predatory, violent males are out there, and many tribes that are not our tribe are not very nice people. They don't like women. They rape women and murder women. They rape their 12-year-old nieces, and then they have them stoned for adultery because even though they've destroyed their family's honor has to be protected because they're awful, miserable people. These ISIS dirtbags, these murdering swine, rape women, rape children, rape, kill, murder. They don't care. And they're not going to be convinced by a coexist bumper sticker. It's not going to sway them. And a handshake and we just get together in a hot tub and have a little, maybe a Chardonnay, we get all sorted. It's not going to convince them either. And as long as those people exist, and they will always exist because they have to exist. As long as those people exist, then what do we do about them? Handshakes don't deter them. Niceness doesn't deter them. Weakness doesn't deter them. Offering them a knife and extending your neck out and saying, see, we don't mean you any harm, doesn't mean they go, oh, wow, I didn't realize we thought you were just another warlike tribe. No, they'll just use the knife and thank you for the effort. If you offered them your neck and a knife as a way to show them what's swell, reasonable people you were, their reaction would not be to feel better about you, but their hatred and contempt for you would increase enormously. They would be in a bigger hurry to kill you. Conversely, if you were one of those orange-clad, poor, beaten, probably deceived, convinced they're going to be used for propaganda purposes, one of these ISIS prisoners, and you stood up and kicked that guy in the groin and bit his ear off, he'd still kill you, but he'd respect you in a way that he didn't respect anybody else. And this is the reality of the world. And people in these liberal, feminine cultures will not accept the truth of it. So you don't get to wish away the bad guys. You don't get to wish them away. And if you have enough control over your feminized society to take the aggression and the violence out of the local male population, that does not mean that everything's going to be cool here, because it only means that you've only got the control over the decent people who are willing to listen and who want to be good people and who want to have a nice, happy society and who want their women to be happy. The only people going to listen to this are the decent men. The indecent local men are going to become rapists and criminals the way they always have, and the indecent tribes from across the hills there are going to stay as violent and brutal as they always are. And when all of the domestic men have been completely neutered, it is not going to be a world of paradise and a world of peace. You are going to be little lambs who are going to be slaughtered. It doesn't matter if you surrender. It doesn't matter if you beg. And the only reason that we have this discussion at all right now is because women in America are not being gang raped by ISIS savages in America. If these guys come to America and start gang raping women in malls, then all of a sudden this feminism and this feminine tolerance of intolerable things will go away like that. Like that. They're going to want some action. And I want some action too. This is the great irony of the whole thing. You know, is the thing that they cannot understand is that the people they hate the most, this is a big RK thing, but the people that these feminized men and women hate the most, warriors, mostly male warriors, but also female warriors. The warriors, the idea that the warriors have to go, the guns have to go, because if the guns go, there won't be any crime anymore, is their way of not being able to simply accept the fact that there are people out there who want to kill them. They can't face it. They're terrified of it. It is a neurotic form of fear. Sigmund Freud said that fear of weapons is a sign of an immature mind. If you cannot accept the fact that there are savages out there and savages among us, and therefore they have to be stopped, and they will not be stopped by reason, and they will not be stopped by compassion, and they will not be stopped by deals or negotiation, then you're left with one outcome, which is the outcome I've been at for pretty much all my life and certainly my mature life, and that is simply this. You had better hope that you can find a way to take male aggression and male violence and temper it with a female sense of gentleness, not justice. I think justice is a much more male term than a female term, but a sense of gentleness and mercy. Temper it, which normally means harden, but in this case means soften. Soften it. Make it human. Make it about people. Make you understand there are consequences. You combine the warrior, which is these male qualities, and the poet, which are primarily female qualities, and you create a warrior poet, which is a kind, gentle, decent, loving person who will go out with a shotgun and blow the head off of anything that comes to threaten this peace. That's the world. That's the world you want. You want warriors who are decent, kind, loving family people who, as I said on that afterburner, will jump into a freezing river to save a drowning raccoon, and at the same time are not so weakened by that compassion that they're not willing to blow one of these guys to atoms if they decide to come over here and start hurting our people, or for that matter, hurting their own people, right? It's not so hard, really. And we used to teach this. We used to teach this all the time. And the reason that this feminized culture is accelerating is because they've succeeded so much now that there's hardly anything left to stand up for. There's no longer a center of goodness and strength that they can look to. All they see are these weak, neurotic men out here anyway. And they're filled with contempt for them, and I don't blame them. I don't blame them one little bit. They're completely filled with contempt. And women are not, they're not psychologically designed for this. You know, women make so many connections. It's not a question of their physical strength. They're just, it's not, and it's not even a question of female lack of strength, because females have tremendous emotional strength and mental strength in a certain number of ways. But this female parallel processing ability that is put into them through natural selection, because their primary concern, at least historically, has been relationships, has been the social network, the structure that keeps men from being animals, that humanizes men, that stops them from living in dens. And these frontier guys who've been living with dirt floors all their lives. They get a mail order bride, and she comes in and she wants some money for wallpaper and flowers and curtains, and makes his life human. He's not an animal anymore. But this ability to parallel process and worry about all these things means that they are not psychologically as well adapted as males are for threat detection and threat reaction. They take little babies, this way young children, this way before they've had a chance to be socialized. And basically what you end up with is, if you put these little babies in a circle, you put boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl around in a circle in a room, well before they've been given colors and dolls and all the rest of it. What researchers found was that the little girls were looking at each other and starting to look at each other and communicate, and the boys were turning around and looking behind them. They were what's outside the circle versus what's inside the circle. Now, to say that they're not exceptions to this is idiocy, and to say that everybody has to be assigned a gender role and live with it is fascism. I don't care. If you want to be, if you're a woman and you're called to be a warrior, then rock on. You have my full support. I know a number of women pilots, helicopter pilots, women warriors. They're tough ass kickers, and they have my undying respect. So let's not get confused about what I'm saying here. I'm talking about the bulk of the bell curve. You have young males who have a psychological inclination, and you have there's no question that when you get into the actual standard deviation of male physique, men are far stronger, far faster than women. Far. We've had this conversation on the show before. But the reason there's a women's category in the Olympics is because if there wasn't, there wouldn't be any women in the Olympics. There's not a track team in America. Most high school track teams have boys that can run faster than the fastest woman in the world. Most high school track teams have boys that run faster than the all-time women's record. You can argue about that. You maybe don't like it, but you can't argue about it because it's true. So they're designed for conflict. They're designed to be tough. They're designed to be tough and strong and hurt things. And where you have happiness is where that is channeled into hurting bad guys and not hurting the innocent. That's where you have a happy society. And Nazi Germany was not that society at all. Nazi Germany was based on cruelty and torture and murder. It was based on unrestrained masculine values of aggression and territoriality and superiority and arrogance and a complete disregard and dehumanizing entire classes of people, not just individuals, but entire classes. What kind of person can shoot a 3-year-old child in the back of the head because they're Jewish or they're homosexuals or they're gypsies? What kind of person can do that? I can't imagine it. I'd rather shoot myself. I would. I really would. I would do it before I would do that. There's some innocent kid there crying at the edge of a ditch. Honest to God. Honest to God. But at the same time, if that is an aberration of a society that is overly, completely masculinized, then what kind of society would watch that without taking action? What if an overly masculinized male or female, because there were sadistic female guards too, are people that can murder 3-year-old children, then an overly feminized male and female are people that can watch it happen and not do anything if they're so incapacitated by fear or by emotional sophistry or not wanting to hurt somebody. I don't want to hurt people. I don't have any desire to hurt people. I have 2 weapons. My fondest hope is I never have to use them ever, like a parachute that I just bought. But if you are really and I've heard people say this, they've said that to my face, and I've called them a liar to their faces because they are lying. They think they're telling the truth. They're not. I had somebody say to me once, in the presence of somebody I was dating, somebody said to me, well, I'm very much against guns. Okay, well, that's an opinion. Fine. No, I mean it. She said, if I would rather see my daughter raped and murdered than have her defend herself with a gun. And at that point, I said, you're lying. You think you're telling the truth, but you're lying. It sounds good and it feels good, and you've said this at cocktail parties for 30 years and gotten the platitudes of, oh wow, what an incredibly advanced, morally deep person you are. But I don't believe you. I think you're lying. In fact, I know you're lying. If you're telling me that you are watching your daughter being brutally raped and murdered, and I could put a gun in her hand and end it, you would say, no, don't do it. Better she dies. You're lying. You're lying for the sport of looking good, and I don't believe it, and it's an evil thing to say. And you broke your daughter's heart, by the way, by saying you broke her heart, because she was shocked to hear you say it. Stunned. I was stunned too. That's what happens when you have an overly feminized society, when you start talking about feelings and we don't want to hurt anybody. These are all lovely things to have, but when you've got people that are out there murdering people, or animals for that matter, just kicking dogs and burning cats in cages, this is what these people do. And not just them, happens here too. They have to be dealt with. They have to be dealt with strength. They have to be dealt with strength that has been governed by a sense of moral core and a sense of duty and honor, and codes among warriors exist because the honor codes of warriors are designed to protect the innocent. Does not anybody understand that? Doesn't anybody understand that these warrior codes that these feminists mock all the time, that these samurai codes are designed so that in the heat of combat, when hormones and adrenaline are filled with your body and all you are wired to do and all you can do is kill everything in sight, that it is these codes of honor that say you don't hack women and children to pieces under any circumstances are there to override these biological imperatives. That's what they're there for. They're brakes on the system. They're circuit breakers designed to stop this killing lust and keep it constrained to where it needs to be, namely taking out the enemy warriors. Does anybody understand this? When people say, talk about male privileges, and I didn't come up with this, but wasn't like I learned this either. This whole male privilege, blah, 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 blah. Male privilege. I don't keep anybody down. It's not in my business. I don't have any desire to stop anybody from achieving their own lives. But when the enemy starts coming over the hill, and when the barbarians start coming over the hill, it's going to be the men that are going to have to go face them while the women run away. And when the Titanic is going down to the bottom of the ocean and we're all going to die, a world that says women and children first is the kind of world I want to live in, because I don't want to get back to New York in a lifeboat and think about the number of women and children that I had to punch in the face and throw overboard to their deaths so that I could survive. I'd rather live in a world where I went down with a ship, frankly. I'd rather have that kind of life. I'd rather be that kind of guy. Because not everybody goes down on the Titanic, The huge numbers of people don't go down on the Titanic. But if you have a world where it's women and children first, you get to walk around with that kind of core of decency and honor and integrity, knowing that if the Titanic did go down on your watch, it would be women and children first with you. You wouldn't be the kind of person who would have to kick women and children in the face so that you could get the spot on the lifeboat. That is a male virtue. And it needs to be celebrated and protected the way it used to be. I think that's probably a good place to stop. Yeah. To say that it's a male virtue doesn't mean that women don't display it. It doesn't mean that it's uniform. It means it's predominant. And we are rapidly heading into a world where, we're not heading into it, we are in a world where little boys are looked at as defective girls that don't share, and girls that climb trees, and they must be beaten or medicated into submission so that we won't have any more rape or murder anymore. And all we'll have is weak, mewling men. And when women start screaming because they're being raped, they're going to hold their hands over their mouths and run away and maybe make a 9/11 call, unlike the actual warriors that I know. And I'm one of them. I'm built this way. I mean, I don't wear a uniform, and I never did anything other than regret that. So I don't claim to be wearing a uniform, but I do claim to be made out of that same stuff. I hear a scream in a parking lot, I'm going to run towards that scream. And every one of my friends will too. And if you don't want people like that around, then you haven't ever been in a parking lot late at night, because you can make all the arguments you want to about how much that bothers you. But if and you can say things like, I'd rather have my daughter murdered and raped than have her defend herself with a gun. You can say that because it sounds good to you and your friends in this badly out of balance world we live in. But if you've never walked in a parking lot in a dicey neighborhood alone, male or female, and not wanted to live in a world where you wanted somebody to come when you screamed, if you call for help, even as a man, help, don't you want to live in a world where other warriors are going to come to your aid? I do. I don't want to live in a world where we're surrounded by animals and we don't have any backup. No, I don't think so. Not for me. So that's why we fight it. That's why we do the show. That's why we have BillWhittle.com. That's why we have our members. We thank every day, every week anyway. And that's how it works around here. So that's TSL 101. You want to know what the Stratosphere Lounge is all about? It's kind of TSL 101. 2 hours, 34 minutes, yet another installment for those of you good people who are watching this at home. I know most of you are either in hospitals with severe pain medication, or maybe you're having trouble sleeping or something. But if you've sat through the entire 2 episodes, I hope I've done my job and you're ready to nod off now. I think I'm back in town next Wednesday. I'm out of town in Washington. Might be tough to do one next week, but I think we'll get there. In any event, thanks for watching as usual. And thanks especially for our members. I can't tell you as always how much it means to me, and we're very grateful for all of that. So until next time, Stratosphere Lounge 101 is in the can. Thanks especially to our friends and you, Viper 6, you steely-eyed missile man. I'm still buzzing from the whole thing. So thanks a lot, guys. And we'll see you next week. Okay, bye-bye.